Members, I'll give a brief overview. We've got Ray here giving us a briefing on banking services provision, and then oral briefings to the Financial Services Union and Cash Access UK, and then we're also going to get a written briefing on outturn and forecast.
Just to flag up, we were going to get the Chief Executive of Cash Access UK, Gareth Oakley, but it's now Kat Farrow, their Chief Operating Officer. I met with her last week. She's great, so I think we've done pretty well anyway.
We are.
We're doing different flavours.
Sorry.
Different flavours of Kit Kat.
That's great. Orange Kit Kats, yeah. The purpose of today's hearings is particularly focused on our work on financial services, which is obviously an area of interest to the inquiry. I think we are keen to get, first of all, the most thorough information we can. So that's what the purpose of today's briefings about. So members, if you are content, we will proceed. So the meeting is open to the public. Welcome everyone to the 25th meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 2022 to 2027 mandate. It is, as always, recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and indeed online. So members and those in the public gallery, you're welcome to use mobile phones, but put them in airplane mode or silent. Agenda item 1 is apologies. Thus far, we have no apologies, but we are expecting several members to join us on Zoom, and indeed we can see them there. So obviously, we will hope there won't be any technical difficulties. But if you are joining us remotely, members, and you wish to ask a question of any of our witnesses, do please get in as early as possible so that we can make sure that we have sound. Okay, the next agenda item is declaration of interests. So all members are obliged to declare any relevant interests or financial or otherwise at the beginning of any meeting. Does any member wish to declare any interest? No? Okay. In that case, we'll move on. The next agenda item is chairperson's business. The first of which relates to the written ministerial statement that we saw last week on the budget sustainability plan. On the 3rd of October, the committee received notification from the Minister of her intention to make an urgent ministerial statement on the budget sustainability plan. This was a subject of some discussion at last week's meeting and indeed meetings before then. The plan was emailed to members on that date. The committee has been briefed on the plan by officials, including particularly in closed session, I think a fortnight ago, by the relevant officials. So I thought we could just open it up to give some views on actions that we wish to take on the budget sustainability plan. Worth saying, we will have future evidence sessions, including with the relevant officials and of course the Minister, where we can discuss the budget sustainability plan. I am open to take members' views before I give my own, rather than simply weigh in with my opinion all the time. I'd open it up to members and we'll have a discussion about any actions that we wish to take forward. So members, does anybody have anything to say about the budget sustainability plan? We'll go to the Deputy Chair, Diane, first.
Thank you, Chair. And while it's good to see the sustainability plan, I was disappointed that it didn't come with an opportunity to add a few questions in the chamber around it, and I wonder as a committee if we could consider asking. So obviously we had our briefing session. We knew the deadline was the 30th of September. We are led to believe or presume an extension was granted, but just some clarity around that to make sure that we're not going to be subject to some punishment in terms of the financial package on this. Did we get an extension and any sort of implication on it? And I would welcome the opportunity to maybe bring some people back to have a few questions around it now that we have it in our hands, because whenever we did have the briefing, it was all very theoretical because it wasn't published. So I feel as a committee we haven't really had a chance to question or scrutinise it. So.
Anybody else wish to come in on the budget sustainability plan? Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Chair. Just a couple of points. One, I echo what the Deputy Chair said, and indeed it would be useful to have some more questions and be able to do that. But obviously I think I would like to do that just after the budget, the proper budget, so we know how that interrelates. Obviously the question has to be, is the 500 million coming in our general direction, how it's going to be, and indeed how the various departments are lining up against it. So an opportunity to do that would be useful, but I would suggest through the Chair, through the committee, that we wait until after the 30th of October to be able to do that.
So I'm just going to ask the clerk who will advise us when we have the next dates we have the relevant officials in front of us.
Chair, anticipating the Chancellor's statement at the end of October, we have the relevant finance officials scheduled for the 6th of November. What we might do is seek to get Jeff McGuinness to come back then, so that he can do a little bit on that. And then Joanne McBurney will have anything she can add to that too. He can cover the stuff around the sustainability plan, potentially also. I'm not sure, but I'll check anywhere we've moved on the interim fiscal framework as well.
Okay, I think it's sensible. We will have multiple opportunities to question the officials on the budget sustainability plan. I mean, I would just say, I think, first of all, we had a briefing in closed session a fortnight ago with the officials on the budget sustainability plan. I'm slightly at a loss as to why that briefing had to be in closed session. There is some information. There are some tables at the back of the budget sustainability plan which give indicative suggestions on what additional revenue raising measures might be used to get to the 113 million that was agreed with the Treasury. They are relatively minor, and when I say relatively minor, I mean very minor. The largest one, I think, is the increase in court fees, which I tell a lie. One is increasing TransLink fares. Now that clearly is not that's something that's already happened actually, because it's retrospective. So I would like, if possible, for us to get more clarity on the table. First of all, on the table of figures, to ask a number of questions. Which of the measures that are in the table at Appendix D, which is the detailed tables of 113 million revenue raising options. I don't think they're all agreed, but I would like to know where each one is, as it were, whether which has been considered, which has already been implemented, because they don't completely decide. I'm not entirely clear from that table which has already been implemented. It would imply that those fare increases, the TransLink fare increases, have already happened. But I would like to know if they've all already happened. Likewise, on some of the other things that would be helpful. They are, in general, extremely small increases, and while I am not per se in favour of slapping people with new charges, we were led to believe that there was going to be at least some ambition in order to to connect to ambition in terms of public services. Not quite clear from this document that we have that, but I would like to know what's already been implemented, what hasn't been implemented, or what's already been implemented, what is going to be implemented, and what is still to be agreed by the executive or individual ministers. If it's all going to happen anyway, I think that would be useful to know. Some of them are things like increased income from AFB testing, grand, but I think some of that is literally inflationary increases on stuff that's happening anyway. So I think some of this is penciling in kind of indexation of certain charges that would have probably happened anyway. So I think it would be helpful to get those bits of information if people are content. I would also say that, as a general comment to the department, I think it's a wee bit insulting to be asked to discuss things in closed session whenever we then subsequently get a document which is mostly kind of generalised description of things that are happening anyway, and some of the key commitments they make are simply to continue to do things that they are already doing, rather than some kind of radical ambitious plan that they've had to deliver. But I think I've made my point and put it on the record. I think if we get that clarity and we use it to go forward, and we will obviously have the officials to ask questions of, but I think we do need that in terms of, we need to know from those tables at Appendix D what is agreed, what's not yet agreed, what's already implemented, what's not yet implemented, because I think some of it is simply going to happen anyway, and if that's part of the 113 million, that's fair enough, but I think we need to know that. Okay, the next item is 3.2 is the Fiscal Council Annual Conference. Page 71 of the meeting packet is an invitation to the Fiscal Council to their second annual conference, which is being held at PwC on the 22nd of October, which is not this week, but the week after. So members, I am scheduled to attend on behalf of the committee. I will be talking about largely process and scrutiny, but obviously other members aren't perfectly entitled to attend and indeed encouraged should diaries allow. I believe it is a sitting day.
It is. It's a Tuesday and it runs from the morning, so there may well be clashes with members for what's going on in the business diary that day. But if members can, they'll be absolutely welcomed.
Okay. And my experience of last year, I don't know if anybody went to it last year, is that there are useful discussions and it actually is quite and they will take contributions, including from members of the Finance Committee who they clock. The next agenda item is Baby Loss Awareness Week. So members, obviously today is the beginning, or this week is Baby Loss Awareness Week. We will deal with it in matters arising because there's obviously been developments on that. We issued a press release and we had a poignant photo opportunity yesterday with the bereavement midwife Leslie Ann Kennedy and obviously there's been an announcement today, confirmation that on action being taken by the Minister in conjunction with the Health Minister. So we'll talk a bit about that, I think, later on when it comes to matters arising.
There's a couple of other items.
Okay. The next agenda item is on civil service, the June monitoring round, and the June monitoring round outcome. So, members, this is was raised largely, but not exclusively, by myself. Subsequent to the monitoring round, which happened in early July, and I obviously made my own views known, and members also made their views known. I have received subsequent correspondence, so this is me sharing with the committee that I corresponded with the head of the civil service to express my views, but also ask for her interpretation of what happened and her response to some of the questions that I raised, one of which was around written advice, what written advice was provided. So, and I will share this letter so that members have it, and it's in next week's pack. But the response I've just had or had yesterday from the head of the civil service says that the Department of Finance officials did communicate their interpretation of pre-election guidance to the Minister in writing. Pardon me, it says the sharing of this advice is a matter which you should appropriately raise with the Department of Finance. I'm not aware that we've seen that in writing advice, so I would suggest that it would be good practice for this committee to ask the Department to share that written advice with us if members are content to do that. Okay, then we will seek that from the Department. Thank you. Okay, unless anybody wishes to come in on that, the next agenda item is on the Interparliamentary Forum on Intergovernmental Relations. So members, the Interparliamentary Forum will meet here on Friday, the 15th of November 2024. Myself and the Executive Office Committee Chair Paula Bradshaw attended the last meeting of the Forum in February at the House of Lords. Officials are working through the practical arrangements for this upcoming Interparliamentary Forum meeting. Not us specifically, but I think we corporately, the Assembly corporately, felt it was the right thing to do to host the next one, because obviously we had been, shall we say, exactly absent without leave for a few previous meetings. So we're hosting this one, and the Forum will be discussing issues around intergovernmental relations, and the new Minister for Intergovernmental Relations, who is Pat McFadden MP, will be invited. I presume everybody will be content with that. Will be issued with an invitation, and I will attend on the committee's behalf along with the chair of the Executive Office Committee if people are content.
Great, thank you.
So the next agenda item are the draft minutes of the meeting we held last week in this room on the 2nd of October. If members are content with those minutes, I will sign them, or if there are any amendments anybody wishes to make to those minutes. Okay, great, I'll sign them. Now, pardon me, the next agenda item is matters arising, which is at page 87 and 120 of the meeting pack. Members, during the briefing of the Financial Provisions Bill, one of our members, Jerry Carroll, raised a specific issues in relation to mineral and petroleum accounts. Officials were asked to provide additional information during the oral briefing, and a copy of that additional information is included in the pack. It's worth saying the mineral and petroleum accounts for 22-23 were included, and those accounts were laid on the Assembly on the 9th of May 2024. I presume what they do is set out in detail.
It's very specific to those areas and the licensing that goes on around those. Chair, so the issue was to be able to subsume those into DFE's normal set of accounts.
Okay, and that's what the Financial Provisions Bill does. The document, which is included in the pack, and at page 91 of our pack, it lists the 14 licences that are in place at the end of March 23. At page 120, the Department has indicated that the provision, as the clerk just said, the provision consolidates those accounts into the Department of Economy accounts. It was worth noting that Minister Murphy has indicated his wish to introduce a temporary moratorium and eventual legislative ban on all forms of onshore petroleum exploration and production. So, members, I'm going to bring in Jerry Carroll, has indicated he wishes to come in on that. Jerry?
Yeah, sure, thanks. And that extra information was useful to myself, hopefully others. I mean, obviously there were some changes from the department as stated in the pack.
Oh dear. Oh. Jerry, you have frozen, unfortunately, mid-sentence. We'll give it a second, but we may need to come back.
See what's going on with that. Jerry, if you can hear us, even if you turn off your camera.
Do you want to turn off your camera, Jerry? See if that helps.
Hey, Steve, you're all good.
Steve's okay.
Okay.
We might need
Can I suggest we'll come back, we'll move on to the next agenda item, and then we'll come back once Jerry is communicado again. So the next agenda item is the public sector, I always get that wrong, transformation board, excuse me, which is page 118 of the meeting pack. Members of the meeting on the 18th of September, we considered the update regarding the public sector transformation board, which outlined the 29 proposals selected to move forward. The committee then requested a brief summary of what the projects are, value of each project, and clarification about whether or not the projects were already in progress and whether they could move forward. The department has stated that it would not be appropriate to share this level of detail in advance of the executive having had the opportunity to fully consider the proposals recommended for funding by the Finance Minister following advice from the interim Public Sector Transformation Board. However, the department have outlined that they will keep the committee updated as this work progresses. So, members, happy to open this up. I mean, I suppose I'm glad they're happy to keep us updated. That's obviously is the bare minimum we should be expecting. I do think there's an outstanding question and an issue here, which is around the interim nature of this board, which we've talked about before, the fact that it is clearly more than interim and it is making fairly substantive decisions on what is and isn't going to be funded. And if we're not being kept updated, then and I'm not even sure that the executive have been given a clear, see, they're the ones who have to make decisions, but I'm not sure they've been given a clear list of things. There is a slight scrutiny gap here, which is somewhat troubling to me, but I'll bring in others. Deputy Chair, first of all, and then Steve Aiken.
Thank you, Chair, and I would agree with you. Again, you know, we had made points at that time, and I would suggest that we would continue to push back on the interim nature of this board and a timeline for the permanence of the board, because I haven't really seen anything around it. But also in terms of these responses, they're incredibly brief and disappointing. Yep. Especially point 3, where it says clarification on whether these projects were already in progress before being selected to move forward. The answer does not even address what is being asked, and I think it's a very important point as to, are these transformational and new, or are they something that's already coming through? So I am disappointed at that response, and I think we should be going back and asking for more detail. But just to support the Chair and his comments, I think we do need to push on the interim nature of the board and the timeline for permanence.
Indeed. Steve Aiken. Steve? No,
do you want to try moving to Jerry?
Yeah, Jerry, can I just ask, is your comment relating to the previous agenda item, which we will come back to you on, or is it about this specific?
Yeah, previous Chair, I don't know if you heard me earlier. I know
we will come back to you immediately after this agenda item. I'm just going to tie up this one first. and then we'll come back to the previous one on mineral licensing. Steve Aiken, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Go ahead. Yeah, this is on the PSTB.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, yes, just 2 points on it. One, they've already briefed that they've down selected some of the projects for the digital transformation program. So a brief summary they should be able to produce. And indeed, they're already probably looking at sort of the financial implications and the way it's been done. And we were briefed by officials, I think it was last week, on sort of the degree of work that had been going along this area and the fact it was fairly far advanced. So I'm afraid it's not a very satisfactory answer from the department. I think for at least the things we've already been briefed on, I think we should be getting some more detail and some lines.
I agree. Philip Brett wishes to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's not as if the committee were seeking state secrets here. All we're asking for is a brief summary of each project, but apparently that's too high level. We're asking how much the value of each project is, or what the bids were for, and again we're being told that that is too high level. Ultimately, these have already been sifted by unelected civil servants, so if they're able to see these projects, why on earth would the Committee for Finance, made up of elected representatives, not be able to see them? So I think we go back on that. Yep. And I just wanted to check, has a date been set for the visit by the head of the service to?
The short answer is no.
We had asked for next week, Chair, and we've been told that wasn't possible, so we are still awaiting a date. Initially we had been asked to present a date. That was the date that was presented, and we were told that wouldn't work, so we're still waiting.
And forgive my ignorance, because I'm obviously very new to all of this, but obviously once a committee requested this on a number of occasions, if a date isn't forthcoming, or at what stage would a committee normally exercise its powers to require attendance by
We don't have any particular legal powers to compel witnesses. We do have powers to compel documents.
We can compel witnesses, Chair. Section 44 covers both.
I didn't realize
the committee has never actually got as far as using that power.
I would love to be the first committee.
I know you would. I can well imagine, Paul. I made a mistake there, but I think it's something we should definitely hold in reserve and keep. I mean, I think particularly given there are significant issues that we had wanted to talk to the head of civil service before. I think given this is supposed to be right at the centre of the work of the transformation, and it's connected to the budget sustainability plan, it's connected to all these things, and we really have to drag information out. And it's not like if there was about to be an executive announcement and they wanted to manage that, then that would be one thing, but we're not even clear when it's going to be discussed by the executive. So I think we can be robust in going back on all those points.
Yeah.
Does it fall through?
All joking aside, this is not acceptable. This is really bad form, and it's not as if us having this information will affect the actual process of selection or competition. It is the Transformation Board, it is civil service projects. It's not as if there's anything sensitive or commercial about that information. All we're simply asking for is a few lines of brief description of each project and the value. And we've already got enough information around the sifting decisions around projects. So I just think this is really bad form that they would deny this committee, this scrutiny committee, this information. This isn't important, sensitive information, but yet they're going to hold out on this committee on this issue. I just think that's really bad form. And Section 44 is there for a reason. Sometimes I think we have to use it, and sometimes I think that the civil service think that we won't use Section 44. So it's good to get it out in the open now, early on.
It's absolutely always good to remind people of the importance. I think it's worth. I hope the people who are listening will have heard, as well as my slight faux pas. But that's a good thing that we're discussing this stuff. I do think people, senior officials, being reminded of the statutory power of these committees, which are not there to be trifled with, and not and I think it's worth reiterating, as basically everybody who has spoken has said, that when there is a stream of work which is completely fundamental, we are told, to the sustainability work and all of the transformation work that the executive is supposed to be engaged in, when there is a small cohort of people who include, by the way, the Permanent Secretary of the Northern Ireland Office, who does not have any accountability to devolved government, and an academic, who's a reputable person by all means, absolutely, and the head of the civil service, who are making decisions in the absence of any clarity about when we're going to find out when this funding is going to be released. It could have been managed better than sending us a cursory paragraph and telling us to move on. That might have flown if we were going to get an update from the actual department on when these decisions are being made. But in the absence of it, I think we can return to this in weeks to come. Okay, we will go back now to the previous item so that Jerry Carroll can come in on 5.1, which is the mineral and petroleum accounts in the Financial Provisions Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't know which you called earlier, but I think that extra information was useful. But I was just raising a concern, the fact that the license used to run for 2 years, and then I presume was renewed, and now runs for 6 years, so allowing a longer period of time potentially to explore and extract. I also raised concern about the fact that there's in total some 19 licenses and leases combined. And given the fact that the executive and the assembly is committed to carbon neutral climate targets, and there's a broad consensus about limiting, if not opposing, outright extraction. I think the fact that there's so many licenses open and there is concerning. But there's some useful info that I'll dig into a bit further and maybe come back again to the officials. But thanks for that.
Okay, well, we can note it at this stage, Jerry, but obviously this is something that can be raised, and obviously feel free to raise it yourself again in any other business, and obviously always say that to members on the committee if there's something that you want to bring to the committee's attention and that for us to look at. That's perfectly in order, so we can revisit that in future should you wish to. Okay, the next agenda item is 5.3, which is sickness absence. At page 119 of the meeting pack, members had requested an oral briefing from departmental officials to explore the issues raised during consideration of the sickness absence figures. The briefing has been confirmed for the 20th of November, and members can ask questions then, but I'm happy to take comments at this point. Steve Aiken, sorry, the Deputy Chair was speaking.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just on that, I was wondering if we could ask in advance for details of the NI Civil Service, the details of the NI Civil Service HR structure, job titles, role, responsibility, and details of any HR links within certain departments, because obviously there are some very specific issues. Whenever you get into the figures, there's some departments have very specific issues, and I'd be interested to know in terms of individual departments who they have as liaison points for HR plans, so just so we know what we're speaking to, because I know when we had the briefing before, it was very much an overview of the entire service. So I would like to know who there is at what grade doing what specifically, addressing this, and what their links are within departmental.
So do you mean like HR people, like so HR? So there are now 2 HR DG level people who are, one of whom is more policy, there's more operational.
Yes, and members will be aware, Chair, that we're going back quite a few years now where the actual operational HR function left departments and went to HR Connect, but each department still has the likes of what would have been called the establishment officer. So it's really trying to find out what those people are, where they are, and what they do. So we can ask for that.
Yeah, just Chair, it's just, I think that whenever we're dealing with an issue like this, we need to understand if it's not being addressed and we're seeing increase in levels of sickness absence, what is the action plan and what's happening in specific departments with specific issues. So it's just, if we had in advance of the session a detail of the staff and structure and who there is in different departments, because it might be very visible once that's set out why there are issues in certain departments.
Chair, I should also flag up, it hasn't made this week's meeting, but we do have correspondence passing through us from the Committee for Justice on these issues. So we know at least that Departmental Committee has flagged up issues very similar to what's been discussed here. That'll be in next week's pack. Steve.
Okay, Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Specifically for when they come, I would like them to, if you look at the figures, the area of the Department of Justice is particularly high. The reason for that is obviously with the Northern Ireland Prison Service. I would, when officials come before us, I would like them to be able to talk about that in detail, because that is where one of the significant problem areas are. And indeed, when I asked the Minister for Justice on the floor of the Assembly, she indicated it wasn't a problem for the DOJ, it was a problem for the Department of Finance under NICSHR. So I would like to be, I would like a part of that briefing to be very clear around prison officers. Thank you.
Okay, that's, I mean, it's slightly strange. I didn't catch that bit of the Justice Minister's response. Slightly strange that a workforce issue would be nothing to do with the department, but I was certainly.
I think that's
point has been raised.
Why the committee, the Justice Committee, are coming to the Finance Minister. I think there may be a disjoin, and that's really what the Deputy Chair is referring to, is who actually does have responsibilities. It'll be really useful, I think, in advance of that session to pin that down.
Well, indeed, and I think if departments or indeed arm's length bodies are outsourcing or feel that they are supposed to outsource strategic HR management to someone at the centre or something at the centre, and it's simply not happening, then we need to be across that, because clearly there is a central HR directorate, but we need to understand exactly where the breakdown is, or if there's a breakdown. Okay, members, we'll move on. If people are content, the next agenda item is a Hansard transcript of oral evidence session on the Fiscal Council Bill. This is to note, it's at page 121, unless anybody wishes to make any comment on it, but it will form part of the evidence pack for when we come to consider the bill when it's published, and when we actually have a bill to scrutinise, which which may not be in 2024. Okay, the next agenda item is the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. That's at page 133 of your pack. Members, the committee considered SR 2024-172, the Coronavirus Act, Registration of Deaths and Stillbirths, Extension Number 3 Order Northern Ireland, at last week's meeting, and agreed that they were content with the statutory rule, subject to the ESR reporting on the rule. The ESR has now reported and has no objection to the rule, and has recommended that the rule be approved by the Assembly. The debate to approve the rule in plenary has been scheduled for Monday 14th of October, with a current indicative timing of 12:30. And I will speak on the committee's behalf. If anybody else wishes to, obviously anybody can speak on it, but I'll be updating the chamber on some of what we have discussed and been frustrated about in terms of some of the slowness. Okay, if members are content, we'll move on. Item 5.7 is the departmental response to members' queries regarding options to legislate for baby loss certificates, which we obviously touched on earlier on. At page 3 of the tabled pack, you will see that the DALO has responded to the clerk's letter regarding the department's view of options in relating to legislating for baby loss certificates. The department has indicated that while Scotland and England have voluntary-based versions of certificates in operation, introducing an equivalent scheme here would require the introduction of a more general power in a relevant registration legislative vehicle, i.e. the planned registration of deaths and stillbirths bill. The response the GRO and OLC have worked together. The response details, the GRO and OLC have worked together to find the best way to pave the way for baby loss certificates, and they are agreed that this would be an enabling power in the registration bill that would allow the certificates to be brought forward through secondary legislation. This would allow the department the time to undertake the necessary stages, such as consultation and logistical analysis that are needed in order to make certificates possible. The department is currently considering the impact on the bill timetable that this might have. I can I just say, as sort of parenthesis, I'm not like, we're hearing a lot of like kind of delays in drafting to do with bits and when it's getting quite wearing. So I mean, look, I'm not a drafter, and obviously there are careful things that have to happen, but I would just gently encourage them, given this sounds like it'll be one clause.
Mm-hmm. Chair, it might be helpful. We have had similar bills before where the insertion of a new element or a new provision, the complexity is in how you word it so that you can then go back and do the work that would really have needed to have been done before you legislated.
Well, I would also say that given the and this isn't doing the work, just given there's a significant debate, shall we say, in the Chamber the other day around the Justice Minister's intention to herself bring forward a number of fairly substantial amendments in her own name at consideration stage. I think as a committee, I'd be happy to put to other committee members that if the Minister and her officials felt it was feasible that an amendment of her own, that it would be quicker and more expeditious to put down to introduce the bill and then do the amendment at consideration stage. Now that we'd be aware of it up front rather than a bit later. I think that would
should also flag up earlier today. We did receive a letter from the Minister just confirming what the DALO had already confirmed. That'll be in next week's pack, and it might be an opportunity to do an official committee response on this. Diane and then Paul.
Okay, I'll bring on Diane for South and then.
Thank you,
Paul.
Chair. And I think that just to mark what the committee has achieved here today, being the first day of Baby Loss Awareness Week, where right across the UK, people are taking a moment to pause and remember babies lost and supporting families in their grief. I think that it was very welcome and appropriate that the committee marked that, and very thankful to Leslie Ann coming up as the bereavement midwife and speaking to her on the important work that she does. So I just want to say thank you to everyone in the committee and the clerk and assistant clerk for all of their work in bringing this together. I think that it's just an important message that in terms of the finance committee work, there's more than budget that we do, and anything that we can do to try to progress this and make sure that it sees the way through, I would be supportive of.
Well said. I agree with all of that. Paul Frew.
I echo the sentiments of both yourself and the Deputy Chair on this very sensitive issue, heartbreaking issue, and it's only right that I think we have scrutinised and advised the Department on this issue. I'm glad that they've come to the conclusion of inserting an enabling clause into the bill. I think I first raised that in this committee with the GRO, so I'm glad to see that they have taken that on board, and they've taken the advice of this Finance Committee on board, so recognition on that I think has to be given. You're right about the issue around getting it onto the floor of the Assembly as quick as possible, starting their stages, and there will obviously be a long time of a consideration stage, even though it could be a short enough bill, and that they then might be able to implant a clause at that stage. I'd be loath to get into that practice. I really would. I'm not 100% sure, because it's been a long time since we went through a full stages of a bill. But I worry that we may not be able to amend amendments as easily as we would having clauses in a second reading. So there is a miss there with regards to this really unsavoury practice of ministers and departments putting in, intentionally leaving out clauses at second stage to then submit them later. It's a really bad practice. It's really, and of course, I took part in that Justice debate, a wee small part, and I just worry about the future of democracy and scrutiny if that is going to catch on. So I don't know that this committee should encourage it, to be honest with you, although I do realise it's only an enabling clause. It really shouldn't take that much to insert that clause into what is a smallish bill by the looks of things. So, I would like to see it up front. It is an enabling clause. We're not asking them to put in place a structure.
Yeah.
And we can do that at a later stage in secondary legislation that this committee will then have full sight and scrutiny of.
I think that was the general point. I think that you're right on the principle of doing things in the face of the bill when you can, and this is, I suppose I was just making the point that I don't really see a particular reason for a delay on this. But anyway, happy for anyone else to come in. Okay. Grand. The next agenda item is 5.8, which is risks created by departmental over commitments. Following a written briefing from officials on the outturn and forecast outturn For June and July, as part of 24-25 public spending, the committee wrote to the Minister regarding overcommitments in June and July and actions being taken forward to address these. The Department have indicated that this figure stood at approximately £767, and the committee requested now 769, and the committee requested details on how this will be managed over the remainder of the financial year to arrive at the desired balanced budget position, and also to avoid any risks to the Executive 25-26 DEL and the write-off of £559 million provided to write off overspend 23-24 as part of the Executive Restoration Package settlement. The Minister's response is at page 7 of the table pack. The Minister has indicated the following: that first of all, the £767 million overcommitment was based on an earlier position, which was then updated, as I said, to 769 due to updated pay assumptions. The guidance on outturn and forecast outturn changed this year to allow departments to record overcommitments against particular areas of spend, and it is individual departments' responsibility to take action to address these overcommitments to ensure a balanced budget by year end. In response to the concerning level of departmental overcommitments following the outcome of the June monitoring round, the Minister commissioned an urgent exercise with departments to inform the Executive consideration of the in-year position. Once this has been completed, the outcome will be reported to the Assembly and briefing provided to the committee. It's worth just saying for the record, reminding people that the Minister has indicated to the Assembly, and indeed officials have indicated to this committee, that they are anticipating Barnett consequentials of about £500 million. So that overcommitment is reduced to about 270, which is still a substantial amount that needs to be found at this stage. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And just again to make the point that the officials made when they were in, the £500 million of Barnett consequentials will not necessarily overset that overcommitment, because whenever they get applied, it's for the Executive to decide how they will be distributed. It's not just to offset the position that the departments currently find themselves in. So it's not just a direct reduction of it. So it is very concerning just to be sitting at the levels that we're at. And just on the Minister's comment on reporting to the Assembly and a briefing to the committee in due course, I just would emphasise the urgency of this. And I appreciate obviously the 30th of October, we're waiting on the the Labour government's statement in terms of the finances. So I would be hoping that in that briefing straight after that, we would be getting a substantial update in depth on all of these things.
We are in a situation where we've got 200 million that needs to be resolved, basically, and I think that is becoming, particularly whenever we are scrabbling around looking at how the 113 million is going to be found, looking at sort of updating how much they charge for ordnance survey maps. It sort of seems slightly a bit more pressing to understand what's going to happen with this 200 million quid.
Yeah, just to make that point and develop it slightly. So yes, the major concern is the 270 million, but there's two things with that. One is if we spend one penny over, we then lose previous over commitments, that 500 million that were previously written off by Treasury. So any minister that causes an overspend will not only cause issues this year, but also historic debt. But also we're waiting to the to the end of October, November, so we'll then only have 4 months for departments to manage to try and claw back or under commit by 270-ish million. Decision making isn't usually particularly quick in this place. So 4 months to save that amount of money, and I'm not sure that there's the urgency that this issue should be dealt with. But just to put that.
Comments with Owen Tennyson.
Yeah, sure. It's just a question that occurred to me whenever Philip was speaking, and that is that in the June monitoring round we were advised that the Minister was going to proceed at risk due to the urgency of making allocations so that decisions could be made early in the financial year. So I'm curious as to whether that same logic now applies in terms of October monitoring, and whether there is an intention to move ahead of the 30th of October, given that the Minister seems confident, certainly in her pronouncements in the Assembly, that 500 million is roughly nailed on. Or whether they intend to wait until after that event. And I'm also curious in terms of how any allocations will be made, because I think there is a risk that we reward bad behaviour where simply because a minister is reporting an overspend, that they get the lion's share of the funding that's available, which sets a really dangerous precedent. So getting a better understanding.
Who gets the lion's share? The departments that are overspending?
Yeah, so effectively, if you run up and overspend mid-year, that you just get rewarded and you get bailed out.
So it's a bad incentive?
So it's a bad incentive and doesn't actually strategically align necessarily with the executive's set priorities and programme for government. So I think understanding how the department intends to manage that is really important for this committee as well.
I think those are all fair points. I think it's also fair to say that given that we were told that, my gosh, if June monitoring didn't happen by June, then really we were, I think that I was expecting the Parliament buildings to fall. I was expecting the Mourne Mountains to crack and collapse into the sea. But it sounds like October monitoring is a little bit more flexible. Funny that.
No, and that's exactly the point that I was getting at, Chair, is that if significant decisions are going to have to be made, I actually do believe that there is a logic to getting those allocations made sooner rather than later, so that ministers know what they're working with. So I would like to see a little bit more urgency and understanding where that sits. I think is important.
Okay, I think those points are all well made, and we can share them with. I think it would be helpful to have an urgent update from the department on when exactly they intend to bring forward a monitoring round. Is it in the immediate aftermath or before the October 30th date for the spending review? Okay, members, if people are content, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is an oral briefing from our friends at RAISE on financial services. Okay. Yeah. So, thank you. We have Michael. Hi, Michael. Good to have you. Thank you very much. So, members, RAISE are here to provide a briefing paper on banking service provision, including options for banking, such as credit card unions and hubs, credit unions, hubs, and the development of a mutual bank, and all related issues. So Michael is here. Thank you very much for the paper. It's really helpful. Michael, do you want to give us a run through the paper, and then members will This is really we have set as a strategic priority for ourselves, investigating financial services ranging from cash access, particularly in rural and small towns, rural areas and small towns, through to business banking in Northern Ireland, and whether it's serving our business sector. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So I'll give a brief summary of the paper, and that'll allow plenty of time for questions, hopefully. Yep. So the paper's at page 146 of your pack, and really it's a broad, high-level overview of financial services in Northern Ireland, and it focuses on banking services in the light of the recent branch closures. So section 1 then at page 150 of your pack presents a summary of the most up-to-date in-depth analysis of the Northern Ireland financial services sector, published in 2020 by the Department for the Economy. And the report identifies banking as the largest financial services employer, with 10,000 staff working over 355 sites. The growing subsector is also the fintech sector, which accounts for 50% of employment in less than 2% of all offices. So the key finding of the report really was that almost 3/4 of all financial services roles were middle to back office facing. And section 1 also includes an analysis of the Northern Ireland banking services from the Consumer Council from June 2023. Figure 2 at page 154 shows that 187 electoral wards across Northern Ireland had just one banking service, and 109 had no banking services at all.
109 wards?
109 wards, excuse me, yes, had no banking service at all. So section 2 on page 155 looks at cash access points. So data from the Financial Conduct Authority from 2022 show that the number of cash access points across all types in Northern Ireland was 16,000, which is considerably lower than the 50,000 in Scotland and 27,000 in Wales.
So there's 27,000 in Wales. Northern Ireland has a slightly smaller population than Wales, so we're like a couple of 100,000 behind Wales in terms of population, I think. But they have nearly double the number of cash access points. Yeah. So I think that's quite a statistic to start with. So I think that, and then Scotland is 50,000, did you say?
50,000, yeah. Now that's across all the types of cash access, so that includes ATMs, post offices, all different types of
That doesn't include retailers where they give you, it's not so common anymore, it was 10 years ago, cashback.
It does include
It does include
cashback,
cashback.
yeah.
It's quite, you don't get it very often anymore. People don't ask for it anyway.
In shops. Well, the data set that's coming from actually gives you a list of, I think, 11. It's in the paper. It gives you a different, I think there's 11 different types of cash access points that you can have, and one of them would be cashback.
Okay, so for example, with that, relative to the other devolved jurisdictions, we're doing badly proportionately. For per head of population, it sounds like on first instinct they're doing better. First reading, they're doing better than us or have more than us.
Yeah, well, the paper does go on to give a little bit more detail on that, and goes into it in a little bit more detail. So, further on, section 3, I think that'll be. So, section 2 then at page 155, as I said, looks at the access points from the 2022 data. Now, the figure on page 158, that's figure 4, shows the proximity to free access to cash services by district council level. So this free to access cash services was one of the different types that was included in the data that I just mentioned. And this shows that 2/3 of rural dwellers living in the Antrim and Newtonabbey district council area live more than a mile away from a free access to cash service. And in all council areas, with the exception of Belfast City and Ards and North Down, roughly half of the people living in a rural location are more than a mile away from a free access to cash service. And that excludes cashback, that particular figure. So section 3 then on page 159 of your pack outlines the recent decline of cash usage over the past decade, and it presents a breakdown of branch closures from 2020 to 24. So back in December 2021, the Bank of England reported that transactional cash use had fallen from over 50% in 2010 to only 17% in 2020. And as mentioned earlier, in June 2023, the Consumer Council published a report on bank closures across Northern Ireland, and that report noted that 21% of consumers had seen their local bank close over the last 3 years. Now, figure 6 on page 162 shows the branch closures from 2020 to 24, broken down by council areas. Belfast, as we would imagine, has seen the largest amount of branch closures at 11. But Newry, outside Belfast, Newry and Down saw the largest number of closures again at 11. So moving on then to section 4 of the paper. Now this discusses attempts to maintain access to cash services. And the first one really is the Financial Services and Marketing Act of 2023, which gives the Financial Conduct Authority, or FCA, powers to monitor cash access across the UK. Banks can now be asked to conduct a local cash access assessment before closing branches. So another attempt to maintain cash services is the UK Bank's commitment to set up 350 banking hubs over the next 5 years. Now, in Northern Ireland, as we know, banking hubs are in Kilkeel, Newcastle, Comber, Warrenpoint and Portrush. At the moment, only the Kilkeel and Portrush hubs are operational.
Is there a reason why, very important that they're in Kilkeel and Warrenpoint, of the present company, Ray read about that, but is there a reason why there aren't too many west as of yet?
Well, my understanding, and the access people that you're going to see later on would probably be better placed to answer that, but the local community can ask for an assessment to be done. So whether or not that has been done, maybe that's the reason why there wouldn't be. But I can go through that. That's again.
Okay. Well, we also have Cash Access UK, as you say, Michael.
Yeah. Yes. So the banking hubs, only Portrush and Kilkeel are operational. So. Also in section 4 there, I put a little bit in about credit unions and mutual and community banks, because they both have the potential to maintain access to cash services in Northern Ireland. So finally then on to section 5 on page 169, and that summarises some issues for consideration for members. And first it looks at the FCA research on reliance on cash, and it found that living in Northern Ireland makes an individual twice as likely as to rely on cash than a similar individual living in England. Also, not being in employment, being permanently sick or disabled, or being retired makes an individual 83% more likely to rely on cash than average. And finally, digital banking and in particular digital security features such as card readers and passwords can be particularly difficult for disabled or older people. So hopefully that was a very brief, quick overview of the paper, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
I think it's worth saying, just for the purposes of summarising some of what's in your paper, Michael, specifically in relation to cash access, it is clear, which is most of what this useful report covers, it's clear that Northern Ireland is disproportionately reliant on cash relative to other UK regions, but also has proportionately fewer cash access points than other UK regions. So we are both more reliant on cash and have fewer cash access points. And indeed, in one example, which is the one of the measures, which is banking services at post offices, the number of mobile outreach post office branches is 29, which is shocking. Shockingly small compared to Wales, where it's 261, and the mobile bank branches is 13 again against Wales, which is 97. We're only just behind them in terms of population, which I think is fairly stark. Just
the evidence would bear out exactly what you're saying, Chair, that yes, we are, and the FCA data that I quoted there about the reliance on cash has a geographical variable in their report, and it states that if you live in Northern Ireland, you're twice as likely as the same person in England to rely on cash.
And is there any, and it may not, you may not have seen it, or it just may not be covered in the report, is there any sense that our banking sector, which is slightly distinct in terms of brands and the high street presences and people's tradition, but there's a lot of people inherit that still today, and other places as well, inherit someone's dad or mum banked at AIB, so they bank at AIB, and once is there any behavioural or other, not even just behavioural, other information on bank closures or branch networks shrinking more quickly than in other parts of the UK or indeed the Republic?
That data wouldn't be available at the Northern Ireland level.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why I actually chose the free to access type in Northern Ireland to highlight that is because if you think about it, if people in areas have to actually pay to take cash out, then that creates a budgeting problem, particularly for people who are less well off, because they're going to take out a larger amount of money because they'll get charged for it. So then they'll have a budgeting problem that, say, for example, they'll take out £200 when they only really need 20 or 50. So that'll create budgeting problems for them, and also different problems of having a large amount of cash on them as well that they don't really need to take. So that's why I picked out that particular type in the figure. Let me see, which one was that? Yeah, I think it's figure 4. Yeah, figure 4.
Okay. Great.
To answer your question, though, there's not any Northern Ireland specific data on the particular question that you raised there.
That's better. I think we've got that, but the clear picture. Diane, Forsyth, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much, Michael. I really appreciate this piece of work. I think it's really, really important to have it all gathered in the one place. I represent South Down, so you refer to the Newry Morning Down Council. It has been one of the most significantly hit, so I really appreciate all this data in the one place, the maps, the points on them, and I'll certainly take this and be using this within the community because it is something that is raised to me often. You talked about the reviews for the hubs. In Kilkeel, the issue was all the banks in the town got closed. That automatically triggers them to come in and look at it, but as you say, you can ask for it. But I think that the big impact certainly felt in my area was the banks all closed plus the post office closed at the same time. So the access to your cash and banking services was at the back of supermarkets. So people didn't have their banking privacy, and this caused a lot of concern. And I think that it's really important that you capture there as well. It's the vulnerable in society that are feeling most affected here. Older people, people with a disability, they're most impacted, and representing a rural area and just and even a border constituency. Like, a lot of feedback I would get from people who want their cash is there is still this great concern for people of always tapping in their cards and people knowing their location, and it is a real concern for people's own personal security and privacy in the area. But I just think this is a really, really good piece of work, and just to say it's great to have it on record, and thanks very much.
Here. Jerry Carroll.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Michael. Echo the points on the research. Couple of questions just if we can tease out. Did you say, sorry, all the 16,000 cash access points in the north, they're all free, or is there charges on some of them? Sorry, just to clarify that.
No, that number would include all of the different types of access to cash. So that would be everything, including over-the-counter, cashback, ATMs, free-to-use ATMs that you. So that's the total figure of cash access points in Northern Ireland.
Okay, and sorry if it was in the briefing, maybe I missed it, but was there a breakdown of the number or percentage of that 16,000 that there is a fee charged?
Yes, there is. That data is available. Yeah. Now, if you see on page, it's page 11 that I have on figure 3. There's the pay to use ATMs. So there's 325 in Northern Ireland, 978 in Scotland, and 593 in Wales.
So 325 of the 16,000 figure.
Yeah.
Michael, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and is that one company that kind of administers that, or is it different organisations? I know what happens and people are aggrieved by it, but I'm not quite sure who charges.
Yeah, well, my understanding is that Link effectively Link are owned by all of the banks in the UK. They're owned by their members, and the members are all banks and building societies. And Link produce all the ATMs across the UK. So it would be Link really that would be responsible for putting those in.
Okay, thank you. Just another 2 quick questions. See the sorry, excuse me, just give me 1 second. Get the key points where it states about all district council areas, with the exception of Belfast City and Orange and Down, live more than 1 mile. Sorry, I'm just reading this correctly. So I just gonna expand on the 1 mile radius in Belfast. So the research that's stating that most people in Belfast have a cash access point within a mile radius.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Yes, I read it the other way. That's okay. And just anecdotally, I mean, there's obviously the last 10 or 5 years or so, obviously the rise of sort of apps and people paying by card, but anecdotally, I'm seeing a couple of businesses and cafes and more places kind of saying cash only. So I don't know if you have a comment or if there's any research kind of alluding to that, but it's something that I've sort of picked up as a result of what I understand to be banking charges or whatever. So I don't know if you've any research to back that up, but it's something I've noticed anecdotally as well.
Yeah, well, just really to the point that I was made slightly earlier about whenever you have to pay for cash access or cash out of an ATM, you're more than likely to take out more money than you would normally intend to, and that causes its own problems for people from less disadvantaged backgrounds and other different types of people in society, because budgeting becomes a problem because they have more money than they really need, and the temptation to spend it on other things is greater. So that's really one of the key issues with pay-to-use ATMs for certain sections.
Sorry, Trevor, one final point. Michael, do we know, so those cash access points, the cashback and other services in shops or businesses, is there a flat fee that the companies would pay the bank or Link? And if so, do you have a rough idea what that is approximately?
I don't. I'd need to come back to you on that specific point, but again, Link and perhaps Cash Access UK might be able to fill that information in for you at that subsequent presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Jerry. Nicola Brogan.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Michael, for your presentation. I agree with Diane there that it's very, very informative and very useful. And I suppose I represent a rural constituency as well, so many of my constituents are affected by this. And as Diane said as well, many older people and those with disabilities are particularly affected. So it's great to get this kind of information and think of ways that we can help them. I suppose I'm struck as well by the fact that people in the north are more likely to rely on cash than those in England. Do you have can you explain maybe why that is? I see there it's saying about being digitally excluded. Are there other reasons why people here rely on cash more heavily than other areas?
Well, no, that particular piece of the research from the FCA, the digitally excluded were one group, and there was also a geographical factor that they used in their model. So basically, they had data from I think it was the second quarter 2020, and they ran a series of research models for behaviours that were, and they showed the probability of people with certain behaviours or a geographical element, for example, that would prove that they were more reliant on cash. The geographical one was really interesting because Northern Ireland came up on that to be, I think it was twice as likely to use cash in England. But in terms of actual reasons, that the data wouldn't show that.
All right, okay. And then I suppose I think there's been a real increase, or anecdotally again, there seems to be a real increase in the use of entirely online-based banks like Monzo and Revolut. How does access to cash or the difficulties in accessing cash relate to that? Or do you think that's a fair point that the use of those type of banks have increased? And do you think there's any kind of correlation there?
Yeah, well, no doubt they have increased because of the very fact that the cash use that has gone down to 19%, and some people say it's predicted to fall even lower in the next 10 years. But there's no doubt again that access to digital services such as the ones that you mentioned are a problem for people with disabilities and for certain older people. Now, some of the data from Age UK shows that a certain percentage of people over 65 are very comfortable with digital banking, so it's not to say that they're not at all comfortable with it, but they are more likely to have problems with it than perhaps younger people in society. So I think there is a correlation there between the shrinking cash reserves and the growth of digital banking as well.
Yeah. I wonder also then, never mind people being older, maybe less experience in using that kind of thing. Also, the rural element of having access to Wi-Fi and that digital infrastructure as well could also be an issue. But listen, appreciate that, Michael. Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Okay, Nicola. Unless there are any further questions, that's been a really useful briefing, Michael, and it will obviously provide us with useful information going forward. It may be that we come back as we move forward with our look at financial services, whether we formalise it into an inquiry or not. I think I'm sure we'll come back. We will be coming back to raise for other information. I can already think of other questions I want the answers to around cash usage, but also things like small business banking and switching and things like that. I think there's lots of stuff we would be helpful for us to understand. But that's a really excellent paper, and thank you very much for the work and the briefing. Thank you. Okay, folks. Now. That neatly brings us on to our next agenda item, which is obviously the follow-up to that. We're running a little bit behind our schedule, but that's okay, is our oral briefing from the Financial Services Union. Actually, I should, yes, of course, always seek agreement. The Hansard will record and report on this oral briefing.
Great.
So we are going to hear now from the Financial Services Union. The Financial Services Union, obviously a union on the island of Ireland who their membership work in banks in all sorts of roles and of all sizes. So they're here today to give us an initial briefing, and will inform our work going forward. So thank you very much to the FSU, to John Burns, who's the president, to John O'Connell, General Secretary, and Brian McDowell, who is Head of Public Affairs and Communications at the Union. So John, I don't know which John it is who wants to do the opening statement. Yourself, John?
Yeah, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, that would be really helpful, and then we'll have lots of questions. Just to say, you will be aware we just had a briefing from our own in-house research service at the Assembly, and we are engaged in starting a piece of work, either just a dedicated stream of work or a formal inquiry into the state of banking and financial services in Northern Ireland. And so you are the first external witness. So and a very apt one too. So please go ahead and give us your opening statement, and then we'll ask you some questions. And obviously, members, as always, please indicate should you wish to ask a question.
Chairman Committee, thank you very much for the invitation to speak to the committee today. The Financial Services Union is the leading trade union in the banking sector in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. We represent members, your constituents, in securing better pay and conditions in their workplace. Our purpose is to support, enable and empower members to achieve their career ambitions while leading the development of a sustainable, ethical financial services sector. We have a vision of a union that is at the heart of the financial services community, a union that is progressive and recognised for supporting, representing and enabling members while protecting the interests of consumers. The last time we presented to the committee, Ulster Bank had announced that it was exiting the retail banking market in the Republic of Ireland. As we mentioned at the committee, this announcement had the potential to have a direct impact on over 500 jobs in Northern Ireland, whose role was to support the Ulster Bank operations in the Republic. I would like to thank the members of this committee and others across the political parties in Northern Ireland for their support in enabling us to save over 150 roles in Northern Ireland by working with NatWest to offer new roles to those staff impacted by the decision who wish to remain working in Ulster Bank.
Is it worth? It is just to, in case I forget to go back to John. It is, but there was a loss. It wasn't as many as you feared, but there was a loss of 300 plus jobs.
Yeah, there was a loss, and I suppose it was looking like it was catastrophic in terms of the numbers. But some people choose to take different career paths at that juncture, and as I said, others, with the assistance of NatWest and with political support across the spectrum, we engaged with NatWest at the most senior levels and convinced them that there were people who wished to remain working, and with remote working, and that allowed them to be facilitated. They were
doing effectively client work in the Republic that no longer existed because Ulster was divesting from the south.
Because they were removing themselves from the south. Today I would like to focus on the future role of retail banking, how changes made without proper consultation and agreement can have a detrimental effect on communities, staff and business, and how a stakeholder approach to managing change can lead to better outcomes for all in a constantly changing environment. The FSU called for a banking forum to be established in Northern Ireland back in 2020. We congratulated the then Minister for Finance, Conor Murphy MLA, for agreeing at the FSU Triennial Conference in Belfast in 2021 to create a roundtable discussion forum on the future of banking. The first meeting involved all relevant stakeholders, was a success, with issues like access to cash, branch closures, banking hubs and financial literacy on the agenda. It resulted in a paper being submitted to the Treasury in London with clear recommendations to support the sector, its staff and customers.
Oh, is that available? I haven't seen that. Is that available?
It is, yeah. We have a copy here, Chair, to make available to the
I think we'll take that pack. It was packed going forward. Yeah, thank you.
The fall of the executive shortly after meant no further roundtable discussions occurred, but we are delighted that after our meeting earlier this year with the current Finance Minister, Caoimhe Archibald MLA, a resumption of the banking forum is to take place this November. This is an important and welcome announcement and gives us all a stage to set out our ideas and agree together what the future of retail banking should look like. The issues we raised back in our last meeting with this committee are still as relevant today. Despite the call by our union, supported by politicians from all political parties and community and businesses from across Northern Ireland, banks are still closing branches and leaving communities bereft of local banking services. Both Danske Bank and Ulster Bank have closed branches this year, despite knowing that these closures will have a detrimental effect on vulnerable people and small business in particular. Post offices are also closing, leaving communities bereft of any financial supports. The new hot topic is replacing branches with banking hubs. To be clear, a banking hub is no replacement for a full working branch. Having an individual sitting with a laptop 1 day a week offering minimum banking services is not what was required by businesses or communities. Hubs can, like the post office, complement the offering of banks, but cannot replace them. And Chair, just to inform the committee, we have 3 hubs now in Northern Ireland. One of them opens 5 days a week, one of them opens 4.5 days a week, one of them opens 4 days a week. So it's not a full banking service, as we would know it, or the availability to access the banks.
Port Rush, Kilkeel, and then is it Warren Point? No.
Correct.
Yeah, Warren Point.
Warren Point opened yesterday, was it?
Oh, no, yesterday.
Right, okay.
Breaking news, anyway.
No.
Consistency of information, fine.
Yeah. We understand that Link is also to address the committee. Link is a bank-funded initiative and should have clear criteria to operate with, including that it is not a solution to closing more branches. We would ask that Link, who have the responsibility to state whether a hub is required in a particular location, are, as part of their remit, required to talk to local people and business to ascertain their views prior to a decision. We would also ask for full transparency, including that Link publish their findings and present their findings to local councils and on a regular basis are called in by this committee to explain their recommendations. It is in everyone's interest that we have a process that is fully transparent and inclusive. Prior to the holding of the FSU Triennial Conference in May in Belfast this year, we partnered with a polling company, Ireland Thinks, and commissioned research into the views of people of Northern Ireland on several topics in relation to retail banking. One question we asked was, how important is it to have a local bank branch with face-to-face customer service in your local area? And 59% said it was very important, 28% said it was somewhat important. Second question we put to consumers was, as a consumer, do you believe that you should have a choice of banking channel that you use? And 91%, which is very, very significant in terms of a percentage, said they would like to have a choice of channel. And thirdly, we asked, would you support a commitment from banks to maintain current bank branch levels for a period of 5 years? And again, 87%, which is again a very strong endorsement. And there are institutions across the globe now that are giving that commitment. Commonwealth Bank in Australia, Nationwide Bank in the UK have made commitments in relation to maintaining the current level of bank branching. Retail banking in Northern Ireland is evolving and changes to the structure and purpose of retail banking are taking place. It is our view, and this view is validated by the research, that these changes are being implemented by the banks for the banks. The interests of consumers and staff come a distant second in banks' priorities, as profits trump all other interests. The Financial Services Union want to see a thriving banking sector. We want to see a sector that is profitable and sustainable, and we want to see a sector that rewards its well-educated staff, and we want to see a retail banking sector that is based in the community, looks out for business, advises and supports vulnerable people, and offers a banking channel that people want to use. This is also what our members and the research tells us. It is important to acknowledge that banks are starting to invest in some branches, but it is vital that they invest in all branches without exception. A blended model of banking that has the user of the services at the core of its business plan, that is a model of banking that rewards its staff, that is a good place to work, and is a model of banking that people can trust. As part of this blended model of banking, the FSU would contend that banking hubs are complementary to the existing banking structure and not a replacement for community bank branches. We would ask for your support in calling for a moratorium on branch closures for the next 5 years. This will protect existing services and give us the time to manage the change that is coming, with a focus on what's best for people, our communities and business. As I said, Nationwide UK and Commonwealth banks have made commitments to maintain branch networks at current levels. I would also like to talk a little about access to cash.
You were just saying Nationwide is the only is the only bank you're saying that is
UK bank that have declared. NatWest have declared here.
Nationwide are technically still a building society, are they? Are they technically still a building society nationwide?
I think they have merged with Virgin Money very recently, or it's in the process of merging. So I'd say they would be a full bank in that context. And NatWest also Bank have given a commitment to the end of 2026. So again, that's in this jurisdiction. So again, that's helpful, but we want to build on that. I would also like to talk a little bit about access to cash and financial literacy. The new access to cash legislation is to be welcomed. It is something that was raised and discussed at the last banking roundtable meeting, and something the FSU raised in subsequent discussions with the Financial Conduct Authority. Northern Ireland has a particular reliance as an economy on access to cash, and we would like to see ATMs which have been removed over the last few years replaced, and those areas of business which have gone cashless be required to accept cash as a payment. We would also like to see a financial literacy programme funded and rolled out in communities across Northern Ireland. There is a large amount of people who are vulnerable to financial exclusion, who have no access to advice and support, and who are open to financial manipulation and worse. It is our duty and a society duty of the banks and legislators to protect, support and educate people on how best to manage their finances. As mentioned earlier, we're delighted the new Minister for Finance has reconvened the banking roundtable and look forward to discussing these and other issues with all relevant stakeholders. A thriving banking sector which is inclusive and transparent is good for employers, employees, communities and business. That is an achievable aim if we all work together. So members of the committee, in summary, we ask for your support for no branch closures for 5 years, government support for financial literacy education for consumers, transparency by link on the rollout of hubs, and a commitment to communities of access to banking services. Thank you again for the invitation to speak to you today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have, together with my colleagues John Burns, President, and Brian, Head of Communications and Public Affairs.
Thank you very much. And as always, members, please indicate, several members have already, but please indicate should you wish to ask a question. It would be helpful to understand, because the story of kind of employment within the financial services industry also matches the kind of story of the shrinkage of the bank network and also digitisation of banking services generally. Can you give us a sense of how employment within financial services has, I suppose I'm keen to understand employment within, as it were, front office or customer facing financial services, as opposed to, because obviously there will be other jobs that have been created, including in fintech and other back and middle office roles that have moved here. We welcome those, but that they're not necessarily serving the, as it were, quote unquote, real economy of on the high street or consumer bank. So can you give us a sense of how the numbers of people in customer facing roles has decreased?
Yeah, so I suppose over the last number of years, digitisation has had an impact. I suppose the level of branch closures, which is unprecedented that we've seen over the last couple of years, again has had an impact. I suppose, you know, human behaviour in terms of influenced a lot by COVID has also had an impact. And banks operate lean staffing models, so in lots of instances, you know, banks don't have leave reserves. You self-cover if you're on leave, if you work in departments and so forth. So over the last, I suppose, 5 years in particular, there's been, a decline in staffing numbers in terms of not just Northern Ireland. It's across the UK and the Republic as well. So we're thinking banks like AIB and Bank of Ireland would have been 20,000 staff at the height of
AIB and Bank of Ireland together would have been 20,000.
No, they would singularly. They would have been have about 20,000.
That's in the north.
Staff.
That's
they now have about 10,000 each.
But that's just in Northern Ireland. That's not across the island. That's just
that's across the island.
That's across the island.
Yeah,
okay, yeah. But it'd be much less than that now, obviously.
Yeah, they're about 10,000 each now. There were about 20,000 each at the height. When they were a larger group and so forth. So. And equally, they had to divest in terms of the crash that came, and every bank crashed, but the Republic of Ireland bank spectacularly crashed.
Indeed, and we're still dealing with obviously some of the consequences of that in terms of our banking market on both parts of the island. Just in terms of, is it fair to say in terms of branch closures, and I want to give maybe we'll take evidence at some point from representatives of the banks themselves, but the impression, and I remember discussing this with yourselves in the previous iteration of the committee a couple of years ago, the general impression I have had is that of the 4 big banks in Northern Ireland, 3, well actually they all were kind of had some level of all-island nature, and then obviously there were other English British banks which had, so there was Ulster, which was part of NatWest, which is still 20% owned by the UK government. There's AIB, which is still about 20% owned by the Irish government. There's Bank of Ireland, which in the last 2 years has become private again, and the Irish government has divested itself. And then there's of course Danske, which was the inheritor of Northern/National Irish Bank, which was another effectively all Ireland bank, but is not anymore. But it alone of the 4 did not have to be bailed out, as far as I'm aware. But my general impression has been, because perhaps there was ownership of some of those big banks, either in London or Dublin, it was viewed to be impolitic to perhaps proceed with certain branch closures at a certain pace. But because some of the political power that could have stopped that happening didn't rest in Northern Ireland, it was kind of easier to shut branches on this side of the border or this side of the Irish Sea. That's my perception. It might be wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I think certainly if the head office is based in the jurisdiction, you have a better chance of influencing. They're influenced by culture, they're influenced by employment, local employment and so forth. Whereas we find that if it's remotely, and at one stage Danske Bank, when it was Northern Bank, was owned by Australian, National Australia Bank, and that was real remote, and so they made decisions and just implemented them and had no sense or feeling of the local community and so forth. Also, what happened quite a bit is outsourcing and offshoring, and at long last regulators are now taking a very keen interest and holding boards to account in terms of outsourcings and offshorings. So, again, the conditions that some people would work with and so forth is now under the spotlight in terms of regulators asking the right questions and holding board members to account. Is no longer feasible to say, an IT glitch that occurred, well, we don't know what happened. Yeah. They have to be able to be accountable and so forth. And on the banking forum, so I welcome the fact that the banking forum, and I think we as a committee will want to understand what the terms of reference from the department. The department chairs the banking forum. Is that they convene? Are they the ones who convene the meetings? Yeah, and then they invite all stakeholders. So the post office, credit unions, banks, ourselves, community interests. There was people who were piloting access to cash and so forth. So it's very broad in terms of the level of engagement. And in terms of what came out of the previous, was it largely focused on branch networks and access to cash, or were there other questions around, for example, business banking, other consumer issues that came up? It I suppose, condensed really down to 2 issues, which was access to cash, which covers branches and future banking and so forth, and also how change comes about. Because I suppose part of the debate that we want is that there needs to be greater community involvement when change is coming about. Of the list of branches that were closed this year, like a number of them are last bank in town. And then that's overlain with maybe a post office closure in the area as well. And you're leaving people with no service in terms of that. And very often these areas are areas where broadband is poor, poor coverage and so forth. So it's kind of a double whammy on people. And is there, I presume there's research has been done in terms of in terms of the last bank in town stuff. Taking example, people think it's not my constituency, but my hometown, Patrick, where I think there are, or fairly close to being a last bank in town stage, or relatively close, I think, to Patrick. There in places like that those
banks are obviously nearly often, or have been historically, the place where the micro business or the person who wants a business loan to start, a barber's or whatever it is, or a hairdresser's, or a small retail business or some other, the first place they might think of going is to has any research been done, perhaps in conjunction with like the FSB or Retail NI, around what that means in terms of starting small community businesses and people feeling they have just someone to go and talk to?
Yeah, no, there's a very good House of Commons library paper on the impact of branch closures. I'm happy to supply that to the committee in terms of the impact that it can have on SME lending in particular. Yeah. So a branch closing can have an impact of a drop of 64% in terms of lending to the SME sector. If it's last bank in town, it's off the charts in terms of the percentage impact on particularly the SME sector by there being no availability, because it's the human side of it. It's me recognising you, me knowing your business is cyclical, and saying, we can be a bit flexible on the overdraft, because I know during the summer you're going to have a boom time and it'll balance out. That kind of corporate memory or local memory is gone. You're dealing sometimes not even with a person. You're dealing now with a computer or an AI bot. Yeah. And
this is the other question I want to get: is this what the impact? I personally think, and this is I think part of what we want to flush out in this is that we are in some of our small towns, and I think we're really risking really significant things for micro business, because if they are not only not talking about bank. There's no bank manager, but it's to what extent are you might be able to, in terms of some of these routine, what are relatively routine bits, a £10,000 business loan, for example, and perhaps even more, how much of that and how quickly is it becoming automated, not just in terms of a chat function, but in terms of loan approval and all of that? I imagine that will be one of the first bits of financial services work that is moved to AI pretty.
Yeah, and
incomplete.
There's a fair challenge in it. A fair amount of it is automated in up to certain levels, and thresholds are getting higher in terms of that you get access to a relationship manager if you're $1 million plus, but if you're 999,000, you don't. You have to deal with computers or call center or whatever. So. I suppose part of the debate we want is, banking is also about people. There's quite a shift, and we know it's change, and we're not against change, because more and more technology plays a role in banking. But what people value, and time again when people are asked, as in our survey, people want their choice of channel. Yeah, there's times when doing it on your app, perfect. For what I want to do, but there's times when I have a concern, or I might be entering into a period of unemployment. Well, I need to have a conversation with somebody, and so forth. And that's what people value is that face-to-face access, and the ability to do it with somebody who's locally based, and you can have a conversation with.
Okay, I'm going to bring it in the Deputy Chair now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to you all for coming. I really appreciate this session. I represent the South Down area, and that is going quite rural and includes Kilkeel, the first banking hub that's operational. That's my hometown, very closely involved with a lot of the issues around that, and also the hubs in Warrenpoint and Newcastle. And just to say, finding out in committee today that the Warrenpoint one opened yesterday is a testament to the lack of ongoing engagement with elected representatives in this process. So I would share a lot of the frustrations that you have in terms of engagement on these. So I just wanted to speak to your asks in your paper and what we actually are capable of doing here in committee. So where you're asking no branch closures for 5 years. So again, in a constituency where we've had multiple bank closures, as I say, right from Downpatrick through the Mourns, right down into Rathborough Island. Every time I write to the bank and I appeal on behalf of constituents for these, it's very much a business decision for theirs, and the sort of things that they're quoting back are the lack of footfall, the overheads, the cost of all these things. So in your pie charts, you're feeding back that people really want their bank. Do you have any data in terms of how many times that people actually visited their bank over a period of time? Because this is what's getting pushed back every time that we fight a branch closure.
Yeah, and the data, it's you have to be very careful in asking the data, because if I go into a bank branch and use an ATM, I'm not considered as footfall. I'm only considered a footfall if I go to the counter and do a transaction. And usually in the bank there's somebody, usually one of our members, who's guiding you to a machine. And therefore, in terms of the footfall figures, do require some analysis, probably independent analysis in terms of, but overwhelmingly, you know, the data and research is saying that people want to have the opportunity to visit the branch, and for, you know, it can be for significant life events like mortgage, car loans and so forth, or it can be for other reasons and so forth. And particularly vulnerable people find themselves in that situation where they need to be able to talk to somebody that's able to assist them, and that can be at a time of bereavement, you're trying to sort out affairs and so forth. Much harder to do through a call centre operation or on a computer in terms of resolving the issues.
It's definitely very challenging because, you know, and you'll appreciate that whenever, you know, as elected representatives, that is very much what you get back whenever you try to make these appeals. And just to sort of follow on from the point that the chair was making, so again, I'm thinking specifically to Kilkeel, where, you know, I had a lot of issues. So we had the branches, there was 2 or 3 closed quite close to each other, so a lot of people transferred their banking to the last bank in the town, and it stayed for a little while and then it closed. So I wonder, rather than, you know, they ask for, you know, no branch closures for 5 years, is it a more realistic ask that we're looking at that last bank in town piece? Is there some way that we can, you know, build towards that? Because I'm trying to, you know, obviously I want to see all the branches, you know, in our towns. I represent a rural constituency, completely, you know, support all of the objectives. That's what I'm getting in my office all the time. But the last bank in town piece, is there something there?
Yeah, we think it should be a much higher bar in terms of the last bank in town, but we also would have a concern that if we congregate everything around the last bank in town, that there'd be a rush to try and get out of town in terms of the service. The other point I would make in terms of, like, it is worth shining light on the example of when Ulster Bank announced that they were going to make 500 people redundant up here. That it was through political pressure from across the divide in terms of we engaged with a lot of people and encouraged them to write in. We followed that up ourselves and so forth. So it does have an impact in terms of sometimes, and when Hollywood was closing, we met the Chamber of Commerce and they said, you know, does this have an impact? It does have an impact. In terms of that, we're not opposed to change, but there's a better way than doing change the way we've done it, which is just an announcement and the shutters go down. That, you know, the issue of financial literacy is one that we're passionate about, because you're leaving people, I suppose, there with no service, no support, and, you know, at times when they're vulnerable, you know, they need access to that support.
Oh, absolutely. And in terms of the transparency that you've referenced with regard to Link and the rollout of the hubs, it is really disappointing to hear that, you know, you haven't had that engagement from who you represent and the position that you hold. Because again, from my own experience as an elected rep for South Down, whose office is based in Kilkeel, I only hounded down communications on that by linking it in the press and really chasing the people myself. And my staff in my office regularly to be closely involved with that, as I say, in my hometown. So the Warren Point one opening, I have not had that level of engagement because it's not under my nose day in, day out, so I can't see when they're renovating it. So that is very frustrating. So I would be very, very supportive of increasing that level of transparency there on what they're doing, because a lot of them are based, they're doing good work, but they are based in England. They're not that close here to Northern Ireland, and I don't know that there's a full appreciation for, you know, even the political landscape of contact the council, contact your local MP or MLA here on this, because I see in your piece you're talking about engagement with communities and building on that, Well, obviously, to me, that would include your elected representatives and creating that window on what it meant. And again, in the Kilkeel one, there's a particular big bank locally that's not represented in it. This causes a lot of concern for people. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of the banking forum, would the link and the hubs be included within that? Would that be a way in which you're getting access to those conversations?
Yeah, Brian, maybe talk on the transparency piece and the hub.
Absolutely, and just to go back on the data element of it, that is actually when we had the banking review in the Republic of Ireland, it was set up the same time as the banking roundtables in Northern Ireland. So the banking review in the Republic of Ireland, part of that was then to go out and check the data, was to go out and do consumer data and get the data so that we could compare what we were hearing to what actually is happening. And that's something we'd like to, when the banking roundtables are recommenced here, is something we'd like to be included in their terms of reference, that they would go out, consult and poll people on their views. There's reasons, it was only produced I think 2 weeks ago in the Republic of Ireland, and I don't see why it'd be any different here, that 94% of people used the branch last year. 94% of people with current accounts used the branch last year, which is completely obviously contradictory to what the banks are saying when they're looking to close their branches.
That includes using an ATM at the branch.
It didn't go into that detail, to be honest. Now, there's a lot of detail in the report. It's a 100-odd page report, and so it goes through, footfall in branches to what, and more people actually were using the branch this year than last year. So it's actually going up rather than decreasing. In relation to the link, and I think you have Cash Access UK coming in after. I know they run the hubs, but Link, as you know, go out and they look at, they assess an area before the branches close to find out. And I know that the chair mentioned Downpatrick. I have the assessment from Downpatrick, which is now up online. And not once does it mention any consultation with local politicians. Not once does it mention any consultation with local business. Not once does it mention any consultation with consumers or anybody who uses that bank, or any vulnerable people or NGOs who represent vulnerable people. So none of that consultation seems to be done whatsoever. We're looking for clarity on that. We have asked, but our understanding is that there's no consultation done. It's very much a paper exercise to find out how many people live in the area, how many people will have accounts in the area, where the nearest ATM is. So it doesn't actually go into the detail of what you need when you're looking to close and what the effects are of a branch closure. So we are looking for absolute transparency. We're looking for a lot more consultation. You can have an appeal on the Downpatrick one. Came in, I think, on the 2nd of October. I think you have 28 days to appeal, but nobody knows it's happened. So how can you appeal something when you actually don't know this assessment has happened in the first instance? Yeah. So it's quite extraordinary. So, but that's the regulation. So I'm not, having a go with Link. I'm just saying that maybe, and we're meeting the FCA next week, that it's something that should be looked at. We have brought it up previously, but with your support, maybe and that extra pressure, maybe it's something that they should look at. It's also, and John mentioned financial literacy. It takes no account of what the financial literacy is in that area. If people are able to manage their money, they may be able to access it, but they're not getting the advice that they may have got on how to manage their money has now been taken out because that branch is closed. And when you talk about local businesses who might know their local branch manager, and their local branch manager knows, well, January is not a great month for these, we know they'll come back in February, March, that all that advice is gone when the branch leaves. And again, that's not measured when Link go into and assess what the effects would be of a branch. So we're looking for a lot more to be brought into it and a lot more consultation in relation to it.
I think the consultation piece is the most important because, again, you made reference to it. You're closing banks in partnership with closing post offices in particular, rural areas, and again, putting a post office desk at the back of a supermarket where people are trying to have their, their private banking conversations is not really well received. So the hubs are good for taking piece out, but the biggest feedback I would get back is the access to cash. People want to check their balance and get their cash. The hubs come hand in hand with ATMs, and they're 9 to 5, and people can't get cash, in the evenings and the weekends. So that's the most common feedback that I get in terms of it. But I just think, as you say, the consultation piece, and people don't realise, I think, sometimes what they use their bank for until it's not there. Right. And then it's too late because it's closed down, because once you close something, it's a major ordeal to get it back open again, and very few people are going to take that sort of decision. So no, I really appreciate your input here and all of this detail. It's really helpful to our ongoing work, because again the banking piece, it's not devolved to here, but it's one of the main things that people are raising: access to services, especially older people and more vulnerable people who struggle with, as you say, the online literacy to banking services, and it causes a lot of stress. They're travelling a distance to lift money to travel back with it and don't really feel safe, and again, it's just a common thing that I would get. So no, we look forward to further engagement with
we
you.
Just to add, Chair, we went out to two areas there, Carrickfergus and Saintfield, where the branches were to close.
Yeah.
And of course the assessments were done, and and the effects, there was nothing, no recommendation, nothing to be seen here. We went out, and normally you find it hard to get somebody to go in front of camera, to be interviewed, to say things. But the local business people were out saying the effects, this is direct effect this is going to have on my business. And local people who were using the branch before it closed were also giving, this is going to have a detrimental effect on me. This is what I do, and obviously on the local town itself, taking out a branch from the local town and the effect that would have.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Chair and Deputy Chair. Just to your point about the access to cash, I think another element of the sort of change in financial services landscape that is a consequence of that is that there's members and customers that I've spoken with have provided me with anecdotal evidence of the increasing reduction of the availability of services as a result of cash not being as broadly accepted, and the growing number of businesses that will only accept cards, for example, and there's all sorts of dynamics as to why that might be the case, but it is having another consequence on perhaps some of the more vulnerable elements of society who would more so rely on be traditionally users of cash, that they now can find that businesses that they want to access and services that they want to access don't accept, will only accept cards as payment. So it's a kind of it's another factor to consider into the mix in the element of access to cash.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Jerry, Carol.
Thanks everybody for the presentation. A couple of questions. First of all, our party would support the demands, including the no branch closures for 5 years. We firmly support that, and obviously we've corresponded over the years around some of those closures. Can you just expand, John, on your view on the hubs? Obviously, you said it's not the same as a bank, and there's limited resources there. So maybe just tease that out, because obviously they're targeted and they come across from where they're presented as something shiny and new, but the services isn't as widespread as it should be. And also, can you expand on the AI involvement in the banking sector beyond the sort of presumably the chat GPT stuff?
Yeah, so in terms of AI, I suppose it is, again, going to have an impact. There's quite amount of research beginning to evolve now in relation to how it will impact and how it will impact on roles. So some of it will be assimilated into roles that will become part of your daily usage in work, and other roles, like particularly risk roles and roles like that, have been identified as roles that AI could have a huge impact on. A significant portion, if not all, of a person's role could be impacted on in terms of it. We have at the European level engaged with the banking employers, and we have an overall framework agreed in terms of the impact of AI and the support for people to be retrained and repurposed, because very I suppose often the transition can be quite brutal for people. So we have an overall framework agreed in terms of how people will transition through AI and digitisation, and that'll play out, I suppose, over time. In terms of the hubs, we don't want to criticise hubs, because if you have no service in a town, people would welcome a hub as a feature, but it has limited scope in terms of it. And as I said, in terms of the openings already in the first 3, it has varied from a 5-day week to a 4-day week in terms of the service. Some of the challenges that people have identified is knowing the day that your bank is going to be there, and then if they're not there, you have another week to wait in terms of till that comes around again. In terms of the Banking Federation in the Republic, are on the record of saying that they haven't, as of yet, demonstrated that they are the solution in terms of that. They've identified that challenges around footfall and so forth have been a feature of the hub so far, but they're very new in terms of, as I said, we see them like the post office as being very complementary to the services that full banking can offer, but that people really want to retain their banking service. And as I said, in towns where there isn't a service, people are welcoming of the hubs, but it's very early days in terms of an evaluation of them. But I would echo the points made by colleagues that, banks, they're billion plus profit makers. They can afford to get very strong, good PR and so forth. And that's where data and analysis by the likes of this committee can, get to a factual situation where we're dealing with facts, and that there's I suppose, an independence to the data. So we would encourage in relation to that research would be part of the initiative that you have identified.
Just if I can, just to come in briefly on that, and hopefully not repeating myself, but when a hub is recommended, it's recommended for a particular reason. It's recommended because there's a gap, as it says itself on the assessment, a gap in cash access service. So the hub is looking out to see whether there's enough access to cash in that local town. It's not looking to see whether there's sufficient financial advice for people. It's not looking out for vulnerable people. Yeah. It's not, and again repeating myself, but it's not recommended because local businesses need it or need a branch. It really is looking at that small element, not small to be fair, but that access to cash. That's why it will make that recommendation, basically when it looks to see how many ATMs are in the area. So the rest of it, what a bank branch can offer, is not taken into account.
Yeah, that's useful. Thanks. Just 2 quick other questions. I mean, obviously, I think it was John alluded to the profitability of the banking sector, and maybe you want to expand on that. Does the union have a view on public ownership of banks? I believe they should all be publicly owned. There shouldn't be any. Certainly, the big banks should all be publicly owned. And then, if any, cash access points and charging people to withdraw their own money, I think, is immoral and pretty disgusting, frankly. Does the union have any view, or do the members have any view personally on that practice? That's me. Thank you.
Chair, on the ownership piece, like we've had experience, all of us, NatWest, as you alluded to, still significant shareholding from the state, and equally in the Republic of Ireland, 2 of the 3 banks are significantly owned by the state in terms of not majority, but significant share ownership and so forth. And we didn't see anything in when they were in state ownership that told us that was a good thing or a bad thing. It wasn't any different than when they were private, and equally we have some now who are fully private, and it hasn't changed. Their culture and so forth is either a good culture or it's not a great culture. The ownership issue isn't the big issue. The big issue is how they're regulated, and how the voice of the consumer is reflected in terms of that behaviour and so forth. So regulation is a big piece of it, and we, like the UK now, have similar legislation, senior accountability regime it's called, where it's individuals are going to be held to account rather than the institutions. None of the big institutions globally even blinked when they were fined millions and millions of euros or dollars, as it was in the States. It didn't impact on them. But this senior accountability legislation is designed to hold people accountable. So that's beginning to be rolled out. As I said, regulators now taking a lot more interest because of the IT glitches that we've all suffered, taking a lot more interest in the banks, how they do their business, and the options for people. In the Republic, we had quite a big outage. And what was the option? The option was for the banks to stay open late and open on Saturday. You can't do that if there isn't branches in your constituency or in your town. So it is about regulation and them taking seriously their societal role. We're not against them making a profit. We're not against them in terms of developing technology and so forth. But they have to take their role in a society very, very seriously, and that includes providing services to people and choice of channels.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
It's worth saying, we'll bring in Nicola in a second, but you mentioned profits. Obviously, these are banks, and obviously they are commercial organisations, and that's what they're there for. But it is true to say, I think, certainly of pretty much every major bank that I've read about since the spike in inflation, that they have had record profits, because rising interest rates means that they have those people who have taken out loans, they will have seen the interest rates are amazingly good at rising with bank rate, whether that's from the ECB or the Bank of England, or and perhaps for savers haven't seen that the returns they get in their savings account aren't quite as good. So it is true to say that all these banks that we're talking about today have seen their profits increase. I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I? Why an era of high inflation generally means more profits for banks, because they can the arbitrage between charging more interest for loans while paying less interest on savings. So anyway, there's a context here to be borne in mind. Nicola Brogan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again for presentation here. I think that's a really interesting conversation. I myself represent West Tyrone, which is a largely rural constituency as well, and so access to cash does affect many of my constituents. So it is a useful conversation, and although there's nowhere in West Tyrone that is going to avail of any of the banking hubs as of yet anyway, I did want to ask about I suppose what concerns you saw. You've already touched on this with Jerry, but the differences in and the concerns you have with a banking hub compared to a normal banking branch. And you did outline there one example of the likes of service users not knowing when their bank might be there and not knowing kind of the weekly diary. Would you consider these potentially to be like teething problems maybe that can be improved upon? And what are your views on the thought of expanding and improving the banking hubs instead of either reintroducing normal banking branches or ensuring that they don't leave in the first place?
I suppose I think it's a balance to be struck in relation to it. Like for us, we would say that if a community has no service at all, well, a banking hub is much better than nothing at all in terms of it. I do think the criteria is worth exposure that Brian was talking about, that the criteria is very narrow in terms of setting up a hub, that if you were to go down the road, as you said, of expanding the services and so forth, they'd need to look at the criteria of the hubs and what it's going to provide. I think there is no replacement for a full banking service, right? I don't think you can replace it. I think you can complement it. I think the Post Office does quite a good job in terms of complementing that in terms of transactional pieces. But if you have a significant piece of business to conduct, number one, you can't do it in the Post Office because the environment isn't conducive, and you can't discuss loans and so forth. So you need a reasonable access in terms of access to banking services, and so we assume, we make assumptions in terms of, but again, I point to the data on research being done in terms of people requiring access, close to their, close to where they live or close to where they work, and so forth. And usage, again, the usage, it depends how you measure something. So I would urge independent data to be used in terms of when you come to your deliberations and so forth, to inform your decisions, because it's not all as apples and apples. It's to get to the meat of it, of what people value and so forth. And as I say, banks, okay, they can make profits, they can make very big profits, and they can make eye-watering profits, which is what I think the chair was referring to in what we've seen. But they have a responsibility in that, in terms of, and we're meeting with NatWest in the new year with the CEO and so forth, and we have had an ongoing dialogue with NatWest in terms of locating jobs. They've employed 67,000 people, and so there's new developments like cyber fraud and so forth, and we have urged them to relocate or locate units in Northern Ireland in terms of it. So it can be bigger than just a branch network. It can be good quality jobs in other areas, and no one will argue that cybersecurity isn't an area that requires development and support.
No, absolutely. And actually job losses and that reduction in the workforce is a massive element of this here as well, which I suppose we haven't really touched upon in the same extent. Listen, I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, but the data you have conflicts with the other research. It seems to suggest anyway about the likes of footfall falling on the high street, and since COVID especially. And I know you talked about the forum there, the banking forum that Conor Murphy had set up, and that's been one of the topics of discussion, so access to cash, but then that there, the trend in the footfall dropping. Like, how do you change this trend? How do you encourage people to come back into the banking service? And actually, I know you're saying that the data you have would suggest that people do need that. Maybe that is like when it comes to applying for loans and mortgages and that, they want to have that face-to-face thing. But how do you change that trend that we're seeing, that footfall in the high street, I suppose, is dropping?
I think there's a number of things. One, about having an excellent service, and again, the report that Brian referred to that was conducted in the Republic of Ireland showed that 46% of people, when they arrive at a bank, can't get the service they want. Right. So one is about giving people good quality service and having the appropriate people available to consumers when they attend. I think another part of it is that education, financial literacy piece. Like, lots of young people now are on the different money transfer apps and so forth. They find it hard to have a debate around the difference between a current account and overdraft and so forth. And as life goes on, then you need to know these things and need to understand, fixed interest rates and variable rates and so forth. So they have a huge role to play in terms of all of us, educating all of us in terms of financials. And equally, as I said, in terms of when the computers go down, their first point of call is to get branch staff to work late and to come in on Saturday, which they're happy to do in the interest of consumers, but it shouldn't be just as a fallback position. It should be as part of a blended model that we can choose whatever channel we wish to use.
Okay, and just finally, one of the asks you have of us as a committee is to endorse that no branch closes within 5 years. I'm assuming you've brought this to different banks themselves, and what kind of response have you got from them?
Well, as I said, NatWest is one which has made a commitment to the end of 2026, which we welcome. It doesn't go far enough, but we welcome that commitment. We are due to meet with the leadership in the other banks in relation to this, because as we referred to at our conference, this is a policy decision by our members in terms of that. And it's a reasonable ask. They can't claim that they need to, for cost curtailment measures, close branches when they're making 2 billion plus profits in a year. So in terms of, as I said, that societal piece, the banks are killed, and I sit on the Irish Banking Culture Board, which was formed to improve the cultures in the banks. And part of the culture improvement has to be consumer-centric decisions. And just looking at either branches or redundancies and so forth, and saying, this commercial decision, we have to take it. Well, that's not a good culture in terms of an organisational decision. It's about taking a rounded approach and saying, yeah, there's a cost involved in providing services to the community, but we take our profits from the community, and therefore we should, provide decent services to people in the community.
Yep, I agree with you there. Thank you for that, and thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Just on the, so if NatWest have agreed they're not going to close anything by 2026, presumably they're not going to close the Ulster Bank branch in Downpatrick before 2026?
That wasn't in it was after that closures. That
they had already announced, they'd already penciled in that closure, and then they said, and we won't do any more for a little bit after that. Surely the principle of it would be, and if they're watching, if any of their public affairs people are watching today, at what used to be RBS is now NatWest, and maybe they'll hear and see there's a slight natural justice question about places that are advertised.
I have a specific email in as the constituency MLA on that the reason that they did assess that area was following the full closure, so that it has been taken account of in their second report there. So
okay.
I can forward it.
So that's helpful. Thank you very much. No, actually, we do have some deputy chairman. We don't. Okay. It was just the deputy chair. That was most helpful. I suspect we'll probably correspond with you and maybe even have more evidence from you at some point in the next while. I guess one kind of final question from me is really around people will be listening. We have this challenge, which is we know that bank branch closures have a really negative impact on communities, not just vulnerable people who rely on cash and aren't necessarily digitally enabled, but also micro business and entrepreneurship and the economic ecosystem, particularly in small towns. We know all that, but we also know that a lot of the people, including many people living in small towns, are themselves just not using them. Even if those statistics are correct, there is generationally there are people who just aren't in that space of knowing what. So I wonder, is there a bigger bit of work to do to kind of communicate, and perhaps some of our work can do this, that the cultural shift isn't simply to try and recreate the 1970s and 80s, which isn't going to happen, just not like but to try and communicate. I presume that's part of why the financial education piece is part of your work. Communicate to people that you still need these, and there is still a public good to be served by having anchoring high streets these branches.
Yeah, I obviously I represent people working in the sector, but in terms of the argument, I think it's unanswerable in terms of retaining services in communities. It extends beyond banking, but we're here representing workers in the banking sector. And people have a right, and they have a right to expect that, organisations that are generating the level of profits that they're generating reinvest some of that in their communities. And that is about providing a decent level of service in terms of people being able to access for whatever reason the person at that point in time wishes to access. Again, I think data tells us a lot in terms of people's behaviours and people's desires and so forth. And nobody wants to see a shuttered building on their main street. Most of them are fine, regal buildings and so forth. Nobody wants to see that on their main street. They want to have access to decent services in their communities. And as I said, for us, it's a very straightforward proposition in terms of you get all the upsides in terms of the number of services and the number of banks in community. And the flip side of that is that you provide for the community and provide services, decent services.
Obviously, in terms of the four big banks we talked about, well, most of them have been bailed out by either the Irish or British state in the past 2 decades. So the taxpayer has already the value that is vested in them was only possible because the taxpayer bailed them out, basically. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for that, and we will, I'm sure, be in touch with you at some point in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair and Committee. Thank you,
John, and Brian. Okay, thank you, everybody. The next oral briefing we have is, as we discussed, from Cash Access UK. So, members, the Chief Executive of Cash Access UK is giving us a briefing.
Chair, sorry. We've lost the Chief Executive. We are Chief Operating Officer.
We've got Chief Operating Officer. Okay,
sorry.
We have a COO. The Chief Operating Officer of Cash Access UK is going to give us a briefing on the operation of the hubs. We don't have them yet.
There, just a second ago, Chair.
I'll continue to give you a preamble while we hope to get the Chief Operating Officer back. So, as we've heard, the hubs in Kilkeel, Portrush, and now Warren Point, we have just learned today, have opened. Newcastle and Cumber are going to open in the months to come. So, Cat Farrow, Cat Farrow is joining us. Hi, Cat. We have papers in your briefing pack, which include informational engagement from the Department of Finance regarding the Minister's engagement with the sector, and the Cash Access UK annual review, which can be found at page 191, and the clerk has emailed various bits of information about how Link makes decisions on the location of Cash Access UK, and obviously we have been sent the most recent update about the one that was undertaken in relation to Downpatrick. So we are going to have, first of all, yes, I assume everyone's agreed that Hansard will record this, and we're going to ask Kat to give us a brief opening statement if possible. Hi Kat, thank you for joining us.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Great.
Okay, thanks. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to the committee as well, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. So Cash Access UK is a not-for-profit company owned by 10 UK banks, and we've been up and running for about 2 years now. We started out on a voluntary basis, and now we are our activity is largely governed by the regulations that came in recently under the Financial Services and Markets Act, which protects access to cash across the UK. So effectively, what Cash Access UK is here to do is to provide access to cash and basic banking services in communities right across the UK. At the moment, we have had 167 hubs recommended in total. 87 are open, 66 in England, 12 in Scotland, 3 in Northern Ireland, and 6 in Wales so far. So we are making really rapid progress now in deploying new shared services. And really what a banking hub is, for those members of the committee who haven't had the opportunity to visit one yet, is a shared banking space where there's a counter where customers of any major bank can carry out their cash transactions. And then the banks with the most customers in the local area take it in turns to send a community banker for customers to have a conversation with their own bank face-to-face in person about slightly more complex issues. So it's that combination of cash transactions, access to cash, and access to those basic banking services as well that we are introducing into these communities. So far, we've had incredibly positive feedback from the communities where we have deployed a banking hub. We're finding they really do support those more vulnerable members of the community who do rely on cash, but also people who want to go in for whatever reason because they've got a complex task they need to undertake, that they really need to speak to their bank face-to-face. We're starting to see, as you suggested in the preview with the previous witness, a bit of a halo effect as well. So these are anchor units on the high street. We have had feedback from small businesses that they really do provide a valuable service to them, that they drive footfall, and that they really do provide that sort of community service that you've just been talking about. Kilkeel is the.
I haven't seen one yet. So just explain for people who are watching a banking hub. What does it like? So people will be used to seeing in Northern Ireland it could be Bank of Ireland or Ulster Bank. It could be Santander, Lloyds, if they exist here too. But they're not seeing that. So does it just say in big letters, banking hub, without a brand?
Yeah. So it's a bricks and mortar central high street location. It's got the banking hub fascia. It's got a post office logo on there because the post office is the provider of the cash services.
Okay.
And the reason that the post office provides those services is that the post office is the only organisation that's able to complete multi-bank transactions.
Yeah.
So the post office is our supplier, and the post office provide the banking hub operator who run the service, and then the banks send a representative Monday to Friday, taking it in turns.
Okay, and it's like, is it like Bank of Ireland Monday, Santander Tuesday?
That's exactly what it's like. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, go on.
So the interesting thing about Kilkeel I was just going to mention was that Kilkeel's been open for a little while now, and what we have observed in Kilkeel is a relatively high proportion of business transactions, so above the national average, which is really, really interesting in terms of volume and in terms of number. So it's good to see that local businesses in Kilkeel are really making the most of the banking hub. Warren Point and Portrush are clearly only just opened. My colleagues are over there yesterday and today at those official openings. So it'll be interesting to see how local residents and small businesses are using those hubs as well. And of course, the hubs that are yet to come, we don't quite know how they'll perform, but they are, as you say, due to be in before Christmas.
Where's going to be in before Christmas? So Cumber and Newcastle?
Cumber, yeah, exactly. Yeah, Cumber and Newcastle, yeah.
That's really helpful. And so Cash Access UK is effectively an industry coming together. So it's not Cash Access UK, yourself, Kat, and how many people does Cash Access UK as an organisation effectively act as a secretariat to sort of run the hubs, or what form do you take? You're a company limited by guarantee with all the banks as shareholders. Is that right?
That's right. We are an independent company, so we are an independent not-for-profit limited by guarantee. So we have an independent chair, we have bank representatives on our board, but we also have independent board directors as well. So although we are completely funded and owned by the major banks, we do have that degree of independence in the way that we're constituted as well, which is important.
What relationship do you have, regulatory or oversight, with the FCA, for example?
So we have very regular interaction with the FCA. The FCA have been very close to this journey right from the very beginning. So we started this on a voluntary basis to really prepare for the regulations to come in. If we'd waited, there wouldn't have been any means for the banks to share services beyond ATMs. So the reason we did that voluntary scheme in the very first place was to try and get this moving and get this up and running in preparation for the regulations. We're not regulated by the FCA. We're not regulated by anybody because we're the delivery body. Link, as the decision maker, is regulated by the FCA in their decision making capacity. But we do have very, very close relationships with the FCA. We meet them monthly, and they have a very, very good understanding of the work that we're doing.
The FCA does not regulate you because you're not a bank or a financial services provider, but you are an organisation which helps to provide this service, which is okay.
That's it. Yeah.
What projection was made of the demand for services in particular, and do you monitor? I presume there must be some form of monitoring the amount of uptake or how busy individual hubs are.
Yeah, we're gathering increasing amounts of data and insight now. We've got more hubs open, and as you'd expect, the usage varies enormously between communities, ranging from sort of mid-40s average footfall right up to about 350. So it really does vary right the way across the country and across the nations of the UK as well. In terms of forecasting, we tend to do our forecasting based on, so it's a reactive model. So hubs are deployed on the back of branch closures, as the committees be aware, but they can also be deployed on the back of a community request. So that's a really important feature of the model, where anybody with an interest in access to cash in that community can ask Link to carry out a cash assessment of their town, and Link can then make a recommendation based on what they find. So there are two ways that hubs can be deployed. And we really base our forecast for the future based on the past experience, so past run rates, past branch closures, but also the number of community requests that we've started to see as this model's been up and running. So we're still in the relatively early stages of gathering that data and insight in terms of usage, but we've got a good footprint now with 87 hubs open. So we're starting to gather that in quite effectively now.
Okay, so would you say, how much data do you have on the performance of the Northern Ireland hubs and how they are doing?
So Kilkeel is the hub really that's been up and running in Northern Ireland for a fair time now. It is one of our quieter hubs compared with other banking hubs across the UK. But bearing in mind, Kilkeel is a relatively small place and obviously serves a catchment area.
Careful what you say. There's a very proud Kilkeel person who's on our committee.
I'm so sorry. I'm thinking in comparison with the likes of Acton in West London or Knaresborough. You know, it's smaller than them, and therefore you'd expect it to have a lower average daily footfall. But as I said earlier, the really interesting thing is the extent to which local businesses have taken up the opportunity to use the banking hub in Kilkeel. And it is significantly above the national average in terms of business usage, which I think is really interesting. And it'll be interesting to see whether we see that reflected in Warren Point and Portrush as well.
Kilkeel is above the UK average in terms of business usage.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Would it indicate that it's below it in terms of consumer usage?
It is. Yeah,
okay.
That's right. But we want to look into that as well. So we want to look into why that is and whether there's more that we can do to encourage local residents, local consumers to come and use the banking hub and delve a little bit more into why that might be.
Okay, I'm going to open it to colleagues. I'll start with Diane, Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Kat, for coming on. I live in Kilkeel, that's my hometown. I represent the South Down area, so we were very proud to have the first banking hub in Northern Ireland, and then Warren Point and Newcastle are my area as well, so it's quite rural. So just quite specific examples with the Kilkeel hub, and it's very, very welcome with a number of banks closed very in close time to each other. And then we had post office close as well. So down in the back of a couple of our smaller supermarkets was the post office queue. So there wasn't a lot of privacy. So it was very, very welcome in Kilkeel to have this hub. But I think a lot of people didn't really understand what it was going to look like and what it meant. So it's just good to get that visual out there. I think as people are looking to the hubs and what it means for them, it's not necessarily what people we're looking for. And what you say definitely would be my understanding of it. Our rural businesses are very quick to want to be lodging their checks and lodging their cash, and they've been very, very appreciative of the hub for that. But in terms of the wider consumer piece, again, it's a private place to bank. But my most common feedback would be that they would like to have an ATM. They want to check their balances and they want to lift their cash, and it's outside of working hours. So we would have a lot of, for example, Chinese restaurants that only take cash. So people want to go into the town, lift their cash and get their takeaways. But that this is not an option at the hubs. Now, thankfully in Kilkeel there are other free cash points, but I know my colleague Harry Harvey is working quite hard in Ballynahinch lobbying for a banking hub. For the same reason, but again in Ballynahinch there aren't any ATMs, so this will be very much an issue for him. So I just wanted to know, in terms of wider engagement, any update on whether there is moves towards getting an ATM or what we could possibly do with that in the Kilkeel hub.
Yeah, so certainly I can take that away and have a conversation with Link about the ATM provision in Kilkeel. It's really good to understand a bit more about that local economy and why that would be particularly helpful for residents in Kilkeel. So thank you for that. In terms of Ballynahinch, we are putting a deposit machine in Ballynahinch within the next few weeks. Probably by the end of November that will be there, and that actually does cash withdrawals and deposits. So that hopefully will be welcome news for Ballynahinch as well, that we're putting that service in place. I can certainly take feedback to Link on the ATM side of things in Kilkeel.
Oh, that's brilliant, thank you. And again, you know, but having been close to this as it's developed, I fully appreciate that you're not a for-profit organisation, and to be commended on the work and recognising, you know, the need for, in particular, rural banks and cash access. And I think that whenever, you know, you're in that space, it's hard to know sometimes how to communicate and take the feedback. So again, like local constituents of mine, whenever they have issues with this, it's not a bank. It's not a government service. They don't know where to raise their concerns or where to complain through. So you know, it's trying to set up that forum, and I would welcome, you know, just some sort of engagement in terms of how we could have consultation with the local community and with local elected representatives to pick up those issues, because just trying to find the appropriate forum to give that back, and understanding how we actually use it. Another point that comes up often is there of course are a number of banks that do not engage and want to be part of the banking hubs. One of the main banks isn't involved in the Kilkeel one and has opted out of the Newcastle one as well. So this causes, you know, a lot of you know, discontent amongst
AIB.
Yes.
Right, sorry, we're not meant to say it.
Yeah, well, yes, it's easily
That's helpful. It's helpful
easily
to know
found
that
out. Yes, so you were just.
All right, well, you did. I said it. Deputy Chair, not you.
I wasn't wanting to get personal about it. Well, it's widely known, but so they haven't came, so it caused a lot of discontent amongst constituent and, you know, and customers there. So again, yeah, you know, I would direct them to, you know, their AIB headquarters on that, because my understanding, if you could maybe, you know, confirm it for me, is that you do reach out to all of the banks, and it is a banking decision whether they're in the hub or not.
Well, I've got good news on this front. So we are delighted that AIB have recently joined Cash Access UK, which is fantastic news. We know that there's been a lot of local call for that particular bank to be present in Kilkeel, and they are thrilled to be part of this now. And we're in active discussion with them about when they can be present in the banking hub in Kilkeel.
Excellent.
So this is great, I think, and I'm aware that that will be very popular locally, having experienced some of the feedback when we open Kilkeel. So hopefully that will be welcome news to the committee. The other thing I just wanted to raise in response to the idea of some more community engagement is Kilkeel was created before we really had our full team in place, if I'm being completely honest. We've now got a specialist team who work actively with communities back in. And they were yesterday, they were in Warren Point, today they're in Portrush. There is no reason why they can't come to Kilkeel and host an event where people can come along and find out how the banking hub works, to give us feedback about how you think it could be improved, and for us to give the local community an update as well on what they can expect in the future. So we'd really welcome that opportunity if that's something that you'd welcome to.
No, and excellent news, as I say, about that expansion. It would be good if it was could be reviewed for the Newcastle hub, because it's obviously going to open in a temporary location now on the 13th of November moving forward. So it would be really, really good if they could link in there too, because in an earlier session we talked about the bank closures phasing out, and that was the last bank standing in Kilkeel, so a lot of people moved their banking services there. So we're you know, particularly upset that, you know, that they weren't in there. But just for me and for my area, you know, just the rural constituency, it's for having the, you know, the business access for banking your money, your night safe, security of money, having that privacy to do your banking, and just having access to cash, because a lot of our small businesses in the rural area, due to connectivity issues from time to time, are mainly cash operated. So it really makes a huge difference. So it's very, very good in our community, and just welcome any engagement that we could possibly have as to how to make them the best that they can be across Northern Ireland, because again, just recognising you're not for profit service, you're not a government agency here, and we welcome the fact that you're in Northern Ireland, where again it was said earlier that we have a significantly higher proportion of people looking for access to their cash than the rest of the UK. So it does mean a lot, and it is very important for us that you remain in Northern Ireland and doing well. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. That's really good to hear. And if I could just come back on that briefly. We are still quite early on in the journey in terms of banking hubs. They are still relatively new, and we are looking to evolve them. So it's really, really important that we get that feedback as a company, that we can then work with the banks to make sure that we're making them as good as they can be. We are also aware that there are some differences in Northern Ireland in terms of cash use, in terms of cheque use, and just in terms of demographics and how customers behave and the idea of what's localism, I think, is more prevalent. So we are really keen to understand some of those local kind of cultural dimensions as well, so that we can try and make sure that the provision of into Northern Ireland is appropriate and works for people.
Okay, no other members have indicated they wish to come in. So at this point, I think, unless anybody else wishes to come in, thank you very much, Kat, for that briefing. That was useful. We may come back to you. Please do keep us abreast. I think points are well made around being kept abreast of any developments. And also, I think if you are able, we would very much appreciate as a committee being kept abreast of any statistical or reporting data that you produce. I don't know what Cash Access UK produces. I don't know if there's if that emerges in your discussions with the FCA, but we would certainly welcome that. We are happy to get more rather than less data and information. But we will keep you posted, and I'm sure we'll be in touch with you again.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay. So we have had that was a useful briefing, members. As I said, we found out then that the outstanding our friends in AIB are now participating, but we also we've asked to be kept abreast of any developments in information terms. I think it is important that we kind of keep an eye on this in terms of this what's happening. First of all, members, the clerk sent round a press release specifically in relation to Access UK. I think it's helpful to keep, as we kind of keep our profile up in terms of explaining to the public that we don't just do kind of dry though important budget scrutiny. So if people are happy to issue that press release.
Yes. Just to let you know, we have inserted an update on AIB because it's been made public. We've welcomed it in the press release. If everybody's content with that,
right?
Perfect. That's great.
Okay. Thank you very much. Further to that, I think the briefings we have had today from Raise onwards have, I think, indicated lots of questions we don't know the answer to, and lots of a huge amount of work. And I think the impact of a lot of this in the microeconomy is still. It's also, I think, reinforced to me something that I think has always been the case, and part of the reason why we were interested in this in the first place, which is that at a Northern Ireland level, there isn't as much of a dedicated policy focus as perhaps we should have. There's the banking forum, but I don't know what the banking forum's terms of reference are. Welcome, in fact, they exist. So if members are content, I was going to suggest that we formally move to say that we are now going to start a formal inquiry into financial services in Northern Ireland. We can obviously discuss what that looks like. We're doing it. We're kind of just formalising what we're doing anyway. I think what it means is that there'll be a more formal structure and probably a report at the end. It'll give a bit of shape to our work. So are members content with that? Does anybody wish to express a view?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that is definitely needed space. I think the Raise report, just documenting the fact of here's what's happening in Northern Ireland is really important. And as I say, while it's not devolved, it is something of key interest to us. And whilst it's not necessarily an inquiry into something, as would traditionally be something's gone wrong or something like that, it's a really, really important space. And I think it's really valuable just to gather all that in the one place and be clocking it and registering it through Finance Committee work. So I would be supportive of that.
It's important to say as well, though it is not devolved, nor is it accepted, it's reserved. So there is no permanent ideological prohibition to the devolved administration acting in this area, and indeed there has been some action in the past. And obviously the existence of the banking forum and the fact that the Minister engages on this illustrates that it is, and while the policy might not yet be devolved, certainly the consequences are devolved in the sense that we have to deal with a lot of the consequences and engage with them. If members are content, we'll prepare a press release announcing that we're formally doing an inquiry. The timings of that, how much of our time we devote to it, is all to be discussed at our strategy day, and obviously that will be contingent on other things that happen in terms of the budget, our budget work, our core scrutiny responsibilities, and the capacity of our amazing support team who do so much. If members are content, we will do that. The next agenda item is to go back to a written item. We discussed at last week's meeting that we wanted to bring the Deputy Chair in, who has been engaged on this. So the departmental briefing papers that we discussed a little bit last week, which include an analysis of the 24-25 forecast outturn information, August position, the department is committed to provide this analysis each month. So we didn't have August last week, did we? Or we got
No, the previous one we looked at was June, so we've brought this August one is new, but we also had some answers around issues that the Deputy Chair had raised that we've brought back as well.
Great.
So the two are linked
Okay.
together.
So that's the page, that's in the meeting pack, that's at page 249, but it's specifically 288. Members, we requested that anticipated peaks and troughs of expenditure be highlighted by the department. The department has indicated, and the department response was noted at last week's meeting, but we agreed to bring it back. As we've said, the department has indicated that the monthly outturn and forecast outturn provided to the committee will include anticipated peaks and troughs in its expenditure. However, this will be on an accruals basis, i.e. when the department has benefited from the expenditure incurred or the income earned, rather than when the cash was paid. Detail is also provided in relation to the two ways departments use the consolidated fund for cash funding, the supply process and advance for civil contingencies. Civil contingencies kind of implies that it's about like emergencies. It's not always about kind of like
it can be much
serious,
less scary than that.
Yeah,
sounds.
indeed. Okay, the Deputy Chair wanted to come in because we did
Yeah,
specifically.
no, thank you, Chair. I think it's good progress to have an update on that, and I just think that as we watch it coming in every month, I think it's just important that we all feedback how useful it is to us and whether we're getting what we need, because I just think it's important, whilst rather than just looking at numbers, we say, was this what was expected and what wasn't. So I think that it's very welcome. And again, just looking at the numbers that are coming through in terms of the August outturn, I think that it just again reflects the point that Philip Brett had made earlier, that there doesn't be a great sense of urgency. Nothing's getting any better with these overcommitments here. Some have increased even since the documentation in the Minister's letter. So it just to re-emphasise urgency as to what's happening with the October monitoring rounds and who's taking steps to live within their budget.
Indeed, agreed. We'll keep an eye on that one. Okay. So,
just can I suggest, I should have put it in the suggested actions. We have developed a process of forwarding this on to the other stat committees plus the audit committee, so that they have the information that this committee gets. And now with that bit being expanded out, it should help the other committees have a better angle on their scrutiny. It's much more information than would previously have been sent around. So if members are content, we'll embed that process so that every time we get this information, we'll forward it on to those committees. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Members, agenda item 10 is correspondence, which begins at page 292 of your briefing pack. And the first agenda item relates to regulation of property management companies. The Committee for Communities has written to the Department of Finance following correspondence from an individual regarding property management companies. The committee is seeking clarification on a number of issues around the regulation of property management companies in Northern Ireland. This committee has been copied into that correspondence for information purely as a courtesy. It's just to note, unless anybody wishes to comment on it. Yeah, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, like I also had some correspondence from individuals that are beyond my own constituency, and just some concerns, and just to flag the Law Commission report on apartments, and just some concerns. I wonder, should we be looking at this a wee bit more as a committee? Whereas, before where we talked about the banking services, where is the regulation on this? And I would be a wee bit concerned over where the protections are, given that there's reports from the Law Commission and where this falls. We've talked before about in terms of property management and building regulations, where do they fall between communities and the Department of Finance, and just specifically, not necessarily the correspondence in, but I wanted to flag that Law Commission report on apartments, and if we could potentially look into.
What would be would there be an LPS interest in this? I have to say I haven't.
It'll be interesting actually to see the response that the department makes, Chair, to the Communities Committee. That will actually be an education in itself. But we can also put through on Dallow readout, as the Deputy Chair has said, we can seek information and follow up on that report.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly sensible. If we're content, and we will once we get them, we'll also get copied into the response.
You'll automatically receive that, Chair.
Okay, then we'll decide if we wish to go from there. The next item is item 10.2, which is the Committee of Justice copying us into their budget update and October monitoring round. At its meeting on the 26th of September, the Committee for Justice received an oral briefing for the 24-25 budget update and the October monitoring round from Department of Justice officials. The Department also provided written supporting information which has been forwarded to this committee for consideration. The briefing provides an update from the Department of Justice in several areas, which include annual report and accounts, final outturn, in-year monitoring and information gathering. So members, this is to consider we just need agreement to consider that correspondence as part of our briefing on the budget update with the departmental officials on the 6th of November. We are also getting, as we've said, an urgent update from the department on October monitoring, following Owen's point as to whether there's going to be an October monitoring round.
Chair, the other thing about this is, and members will have seen this depending on what committees they've been on previously, Justice it tends to be an exemplar what they receive from the department. Departments have varying staffing levels and differing ways of doing things, but Justice responses have always been seen as an exemplar, and it's useful just for committee members to see that. And obviously going forward, when we build our resources around budget, we look to have specific examples of what is good practice, and Justice would be one of those departments that does this particularly well.
Very good.
Yeah, okay. So the next agenda item is 10.3, an SL1 on the payment and electronic money institution insolvency rules. At its meeting on the 26th of September, the Committee for Justice considered an SL1 from the Department of Justice stating its intention to propose a statutory rule. The Department advised the rule will be brought with the concurrence of the Department of Finance to make rules to give effect to the payment and electronic money institution insolvency regulations. Furthermore, it is stated that the Insolvency Service in the Department of Economy is the policy lead for the subordinate legislation and responsible for drafting it. As the proposed rules cut across the responsibilities of several departments, they will require executive approval following consultation with respective committees. So the Committee for Justice agreed to forward the SL1 to us and the Economy Committee, of which the Chair is also a member of our committee, for information. So at this stage, that's simply to note. I presume we'll probably get more information on that as they...
Well, Chair, as this unfolds, it's one of those curious situations where DOF, acting under the instruction of other departments, does a regulatory thing, but the policies all sit elsewhere. So there's not as much, if really particularly anything, for this committee to actually scrutinise. It'll fall more to Economy and Justice.
Okay. So members are content to note at this point. And then the final is just the final item of correspondence relates to the Youth Assembly newsletter. So at page 425, you have a copy of that, their update for September 24. So that's just a note. The next agenda, unless anyone wishes to comment on it. The next agenda item is the draft forward work programme, which is obviously filling up. We still have some outstanding things to confirm. If the clerk wants to explain that to us.
As you say, we've this is always an incredibly movable feast. We do have things we need to confirm. We need to reschedule the DSO briefing. They have a rationale as to why they can't do the 23rd. The right officials aren't all there, and there's particular officials we absolutely need for that session. So we're going to look to reschedule that, but we will try and move something else into the 23rd to take its place that we're already trying to schedule. Next week, members will recall we have a briefing from Professor Iona Latu on her gender recognition report that she did a couple of years ago now. We've looked at this in the past and we'd agreed to take an oral briefing. That will be a Zoom session before we go into the effective questioning session, which obviously is training, so it won't be a part of the public committee session. I'll come back to members about attendance at that. I appreciate some members will actually be having a session on the same day and we would not expect them to come to a second session. Other members may have had sessions in previous committees. However, those who haven't, I would absolutely urge to come to this, and we will collect that attendance. To facilitate the length of time needed for that, we're proposing a 1:30 start next week. And what I would say for those who aren't necessarily going to join the effective questioning, if they can even join on Zoom for that first session with Professor Latu, that would be really helpful. Sorry, Chair.
So will we be meeting in the room and you'll be Zooming her onto this? So like if I'm physically here...
No, physically here, but we'll just do the usual Zoom. So it's really just so members who aren't necessarily going to be here for the effective questioning will be able to catch that as well. Chair, you had asked about bringing in FSB and Consumer Council. That's now been scheduled for the 6th of November, and that'll feed now into this new work stream inquiry. Open government.
New work stream, but it's just we've put it in a specific file. We opened a file marked required.
Yes, we actually have done that. We did that in advance, Chair.
There's a file, just to be clear.
There's literally a file that says inquiry on it. We do that. We really do that. Open government, members will recall, had requested to brief. They have quite a number of things they want to deal with. So what we're looking at is sliding them into the slot on the 23rd that the DSO will now move out of. We need to confirm that with them. Strategic planning session on the 13th of November will now be at the Stormont, not at the UU. That just didn't work out dates-wise, so we will organise that and send out further details. The other thing I wanted to seek members' agreement to do is we're aware that there have been some significant property sales, and we maybe should, if members are content, look for an update on that. I think that's Netherley has sold.
Right, okay. Who's bought that? Maybe we don't know.
I think that's the thing, is just finding out more.
I definitely think we should definitely get a briefing on that.
Yeah, must have sold as well.
Can I just suggest that we, I wonder, pending what, so we are due to get our briefing on forecast, the outturn and forecast outturn briefing we're due to get on the 23rd is from written. Is it worth us having we have a briefing on the marriage civil partnership bill?
So we have that when we're looking to move out DSO, bring in open government. The outturn and forecast outturn is always a written briefing unless we seek to bring them in. Yeah.
Okay, because we're then off the following week. I'm just wondering whether it's the following week, when we were due to meet, will be literally when the budget is happening, or the state. I just wonder, okay, well, we can talk about that in separate time. I'm just sort of wondering whether we need to, in advance, we should have something from the officials, given we're not going to hear anything about. We'll have several weeks where we don't know what's happening with June Monroe, we don't know what's happening with anything.
Chair, we have a number of actions we're taking away from today. Sure. We go into the data readout, so we will get that information back.
Okay, and we can come back to next week. I would just make, it now looks vanishingly unlikely we're going to have the head of the civil service and the public sector transformation board come to us next week. I just want to reiterate. I just want to reiterate the point that was made earlier on by a few people that it is now twice the 2 times we have been attempted to very reasonably take evidence from the head of the civil service. There have been issues with it, and it isn't a great look. That's not meant as a personal slight, but it is a challenge whenever we as a committee are left in the situation we are left in, when we really have to scrabble to get confirmation of dates, to get briefed about basic things. And I'm fairly sure that the previous time it was, in fairness, it was a delay in the, we are told at the Minister's office, and we had to say quite pointedly that we expected, but that happened on the very last meeting before the
Chair. Just to be fair,
and it's a slightly different one.
Clarify, the office of the head of the civil service came back almost immediately when we made the request that time to confirm they would do a date. It was the hold-up was in the office of.
I'm aware there's a certain situation. It's just we should say that, and this isn't. But this is a more general. Is that we obviously expect that when we ask for people to come, as Mr. Frew said earlier on, that we are, at least we can agree that promptly.
Yes, just on that, Chair. So for the record, we have offered a date to the head of the civil service. Obviously, next week does not suit her. That's fine. But for those listening, and hopefully at the readout meetings, Clark, that we can make it abundantly clear this committee expects next Wednesday to have a date from the head of the civil service, which she's coming to us.
You made the point very well. You obviously know how to chair a committee yourself, but I think there's a very fair point. I think it's important just to say that it's not candidly good enough for us to be there will be diary clashes, and there will reasonably be requests to be flexible, and we are generally flexible, but it's not the most respectful thing for a committee to have to scrabble and beg to have, or appear to have to beg to have people come in front of and give it evidence. Anyway, that point having been made, I think it's time for any other business.
I just wanted to raise that I met with the President of Northern Ireland SIPFA, and he has got next week the UK President of SIPFA coming over and the new CEO. They have some events and have asked to meet with some of our MLA's Finance Committee on Monday morning around 11:15. So if these are agreeable, I think that would be a really good idea for the Finance Committee to meet with them when they're over.
I think it's a very good idea. So if members are around, we'll ask that if the staff could put that in the WhatsApp group and just remind people of the timing of that.
Yeah, we'll do that.
That would be helpful. Thank you very much. The next agenda item is, if there's no other business, a date, time and place of next meeting, which is Wednesday, 16th of October, my apologies, 1:30, so it's halfway between our two, just to fit in our effective questioning.
I will do, there'll be reminders, yes, Chair.
And I should just say, there is a small chance that I may not be here, but which is to do with a diary, which I will chat to the Deputy Chair, but if I'm not, I will make sure everyone is aware in advance. But otherwise, the meeting is Wednesday, 6th of October at 1:30 in this room. And I will put the question to them. Committee do now adjourn. The committee is now adjourned.
Chair.